Festival. 22 years and going strong. 3 nights, over 8 genres of music, over 20 artists. 1 location, the Winter Park Sports Stadium in the Nature Island, Dominica. The government of Dominica and Discover Dominica Authority presents Dominica's World Creole Music Festival 2022, featuring Jocelyn Bewal from Casa Fame,
Almighty God, who in thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness have appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of society and the just government of man, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor as thy servant, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trusts in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Let thy best blessings descend upon us here in this Parliament assembled, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge, all which we ask in the name and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. In so far as we are meeting under the provisions attached to Standing Orders 11.3, the House is hereby informed that Standing Orders 9.2, 28 and 29.1, and 32, as it relates to the minutes of the proceedings of the last meeting, notice of motion, form of notice, and dispensing notice are suspended. Nice and pause. Nice. So when we press the control, it goes on green. Then we pause until I press mine to allow you to get it to work. It has been moved and seconded that the order paper be adopted. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
And congratulatory remarks.
Yeah, I would like to take the opportunity this morning to congratulate Tia Lafo in the winning of the gold medal in the North American, Central American, and Caribbean Athletics Association meet held this weekend. I think all of us should be proud as Dominicans. As I've said, whether in the arena of leadership, whether it's in sports or in community development, when a Dominican really excel, all of us, without reservation, should really be proud of the Dominican, you know? It's our brothers and sisters. We have to stand behind one another. So again, I would like to congratulate Tia Lafo.
Speaker, thank you very much. I stand up as well to congratulate the young athlete, Tia Lafont. We have been partnering with the Olympic Committee to provide her with support so that she doesn't have to be engaged in work, etc., in preparation for the Olympics. And so, and of course, as you saw in the budget address, we have made provisions to establish a sports trust fund to provide direct financial support to athletes who are preparing for regional and international events. I want to say to the country that the government of Dominica will, as a recognition of our appreciation and our congratulations and commendation to Tia Lafont for having won the silver medal at the Commonwealth Games and now the gold medal, that the government of Dominica will give her a gift, a monetary gift of EC $200,000, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say to Tia Lafont, if she wins the gold at the Olympic, it will be much more than that. And so we are with her, we celebrate her, we acknowledge her diligence, her commitment to work, and of course to everyone who has provided her with the guidance and so on. But we in this country, we are certainly appreciative of her efforts, and we wish to encourage others to follow in a direction. It requires commitment, it requires discipline. So again, a monetary gift of EC $200, and that 200,000 EC dollars will be given to Tia Lafont, and that shall be deposited in our account very soon. Thank you.
Just one comment on the announcement, because we're not going to talk, we're just going to go right through the session. I just like to point out 44.1 to members, and just be aware of 44.1. 44.1 reads, subject to the provision of Standing Orders 12-13, debate upon a motion, bill, or amendment shall be relevant to such motion, bill, or amendment, and a member shall confine his observations to the subject under discussion. So please be guided. Let's proceed. Who's it? Honorable Paul? Yeah, Honorable Paul? Yes, Honorable Paul. Your mic, Honorable Paul. Press nice. Press it again. Nice.
I too want to add my commendation to Tia Lafont. She has been excelling, and this time with a gold medal at the North American, Central American, Caribbean meets. And we are very, very proud of Tia, and I want to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for this gesture of offering $200,000 to Tia Lafont. It's well deserved, and we really want to encourage Tia and all other athletes to do their best, and especially Tia, has been making us very proud.
Yes. I just wanted to just announce that I received a formal letter from the Honorable Dr. Vince Henderson, who has asked leave of permission to be absent because he's out of state. So permission is granted. I also received one from Honorable Octavia Alfred because she's not feeling 100%. So again, permission is granted. We received also a formal letter also from Senator Masley, who is out of state. Permission is also granted. Before we continue, let us, at least all of us there, give a major round of applause to Tia Lafont. This is a major achievement. Yes, let's proceed.
Presentation of papers.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table the following papers. One, Money Laundering Prevention Schedule Order 2022. 2. Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Regulations 2022, SRO 2022, 26 of 2022. Proceeds of Crime, Trust, and Non-Profit Organization Amendment Regulation 2022, SRO 25 of 2022. Proceeds of Crime Anti-Money Laundering and Suppression of Terrorist Financing Amendment Code of Practice 2022, SRO 27 of 2022. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the later stage of the proceedings, I'll be taking all the stages of the bill shortly entitled Money Laundering Amendment Act 2022 in the standing order, standing in my name on the other paper, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the later stage of the proceeding, I'll be taking all the stages of the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022, standing in my name on the other paper. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice at the later stage of the proceeding, I'll be taking all the stages of the bill shortly entitled Suppression of Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022, standing in my name on the other paper.
Statement by ministers. Introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2022 be read the first time.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Act 2022.
The bill has been read the first time.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022 be read the first time.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Amendment Act 2022.
The bill has been read the first time.
Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022 be read the first time.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022.
The bill has been read the first time.
Resolution. Mr. Speaker, whereas it has become necessary to amend Part 2 of the schedule to the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Chapter 7303, to strengthen the anti-money laundering, countering of financing of terrorism, and countering of financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction framework in Dominica. And whereas, Mr. Speaker, the amendments require the existing item 3 and 5 of Part 2 of the schedule of the Act to be deleted by substituting it with a new item 3, providing for casinos, which is gaming, when customers engage in financial transaction equal to the threshold of $5,000 transaction, and a new item 5 providing for dealers of precious metals and dealers in precious stones when engaged in any transaction with customers equal to or above the threshold of $15,000. And whereas, Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 55 of the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Chapter 73, the Minister responsible for responsibility for legal affairs is empowered to amend the said schedule by orders subject to affirmative resolution of the House. And whereas the Minister with responsibility for legal affairs has made such order and now seeks the approval of the said order by affirmative resolution of the Honorable House. Be it therefore, Mr. Speaker, resolved that the Honorable House now determines and declares that the order of the Minister with responsibility for legal affairs, deleting the existing item 3 of item 5 from part 2 of the schedule to the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Chapter 73, and substituting new item 3 providing for casino gaming when customers engage in financial transactions equal to the above threshold of $5,000, and a new item 5 for dealers in precious metals and dealers in precious stone when they engage in any cash transaction with a customer equal or above the threshold of $15,000, respectively, is thereby approved.
Second motion.
The motion, yeah, continue, sorry.
Mr. Speaker, this is a very short order which contains 3 clauses and seeks to amend the schedule to the Anti-Money Laundering Prevention Act, Chapter 73 of the 2017 revised laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica. The schedule of the Act is amended in Part 2, which deals with other business activities of non-financial institution. This amendment clarifies the definition of casino, which is gaming, when customers engage in financial transaction equal to or above the threshold of $5,000. This new definition will bring the legislation in line with Recommendation 22.1A of the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations. Though Recommendation 22.1, Mr. Speaker, recommends that the threshold of US or Euro $3,000 has opted for a higher standard of EC $5,000. Item 5, which appears as jewelry business, is removed and substituted with dealers in precious metals and dealers in precious stone when they engage in any cash transaction with a customer to or above the threshold of $15,000. Mr. Speaker, Dominica's anti-money laundering framework places the onus has a very onerous task on all dealers in precious metals and stones to collect customers' due diligence information irrespective of the value of the transaction. As such, Mr. Speaker, the requirement is inconsistent with the minimum international standards and very taxing on dealers in precious metals and stones. Here's, therefore, Mr. Speaker, the recommendation for the said amendment. And I therefore, Mr. Speaker, lay this matter before this honorable House.
The matter is before the House for debate.
Dominica is doing everything possible to tighten the legislative framework to mitigate against fraudulent behavior insofar as money laundering is concerned and other predicate offenses. There being no debate from the other side of the House, it is clear, therefore, that we're moving in the right direction, Mr. Speaker, and I therefore commend this matter before this honorable House.
This concludes the debate on the motion. I will now put the question. Be it resolved that this Honorable House now determines and declares that the order of the Minister with responsibility for legal affairs, deleting the existing item 3 and item 5 from part 2 of the schedule to the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Chapter 7303, and substituting a new item 3 providing for casinos, and that is in bracket gambling, when customers engage in financial transaction equal to or above a threshold of $5,000. And a new item 5, providing for dealers in precious metals and dealers in precious stones when they engage in any cash transaction with a customer equal to or above a threshold of $15,000 respectively, is thereby approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The motion has been approved.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled the Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act be read a second time.
Seconded.
Mr. Speaker, money laundering remains one of the most concerning financial crimes due to its connection and other financial crimes such as terrorism, financing of terrorism, illicit drug, firearms, and human trafficking in the entire world, and Dominica, therefore, is no exception. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned just now, Dominica has ensured a holistic response to the 40 recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force, which is geared towards improving Dominica's compliance rating, strengthening the responses, and ensuring that Dominica is deemed compliant and transparent in its 2023 Mutual Evaluation Report. The Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2022, Mr. Speaker, seek to amend the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Chapter 73 of the 2017 revised laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica. The bill therefore comprises 8 clauses and seeks to provide for a definition and the creation of a summary offense of money laundering, defensive penalties, the establishment of a supervisory authority, the strengthening of the Anti-Money Laundering Supervisory Committee, and the addition to the list of scheduled businesses. Clause 1, Mr. Speaker, and 2 are the short title and interpretation sections of the bill, respectively. This bill seeks to insert a new definition for Security Regulatory Commission, and this amendment also creates a new summary offense of money laundering, which is Clause 4, which amends Clause 3 of the Principal Act, and to provide for more proportionate and divisive penalties in relation to a conviction. A person convicted of money laundering of a money laundering offense, as outlined in Section 3.1 of the Principal Act, is guilty of an offense and is liable as follows. On summary conviction, Mr. Speaker, a fine not exceeding $500,000 and imprisonment to a term not exceeding 7 years if the person is a natural person, which means if the person is a private person and not as a corporate or a public business. A fine not exceeding $5 million if he is a body corporate. On conviction, Mr. Speaker, on indictment, to a fine not exceeding $5 million and to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 15 years if he's a natural person. To a fine not exceeding $15 million if it is a body corporate. Mr. Speaker, Clause 4 also add a new Section 3, subsection 3, Section 3, Subsection 4, which defines the word transaction to include a gift received or a gift made. This amendment also seeks to establish the Security Regulatory Commission as the money laundering supervisory authority of the Security Exchange, which is Clause 5. And Clause 5, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 7 of the Principal Act. Clause 6 amends Section 15 of the Principal Act and provide for the strengthening of the Anti-Money Laundering Advisory Committee by adding a representative of the Banking Supervisory Authority, a representative of the Security Regulatory Commission, and the Director of Public Prosecution to its membership. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that these additions will broaden the scope of the abilities of the committee to better perform its function. Section 28, subsection 2 of the parent act is amended by clause 7 of the amendment, which now expressively provides for summary conviction of the stated offense. Section 28 deals with the offense of failure to report the transaction of cash exceeding $10,000 into and out of Dominica in any amount prescribed by the regulation. Clause 8, Mr. Speaker, amends the schedule of the Act in Part 1 by adding virtual assets business to the list. Mr. Speaker, with this brief introduction, the matter is now before this Honorable House for possible debate.
The bill is before the House for debate. Your mic, Honorable.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I rise to support the amendments to the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Chapter 7303. I want to make a few observations, Mr. Speaker, that will be well in keeping with the provisions of Section 44(1) of the Standing Orders. But before I do that, I want to make the observations that members of normally functioning parliaments around the world enjoy the absolute privilege of protection from liability for things that they may say in debate. This is the freedom of speech immunity. But in this parliament, it is enjoyed exclusively by the majority side of the House. It's a privilege from which the minority is routinely...
Honorable Linton, before you proceed, I would ask you to withdraw that statement. You imputed improper motive on the chair.
Mr. Speaker, I raised this matter with you.
But you cannot... Your mic is off. Take your seat, please. I mean, I don't know. Today, let's just go with a nice debate on the bill. We have to do a preamble that imputing improper motive on the chair. And I would like to take the opportunity now to avail the Standing Orders Committee that we have a lot of work to do. Because members will come in the House and want to impute improper motive. I think we need to take tougher action. And also, members would leave this House and go on radio station and say all sorts of things about other members and even the chair. We really have a lot of work to do in this Honorable House in regards to the Standing Orders Committee and the Privileges Committee. Proceed with the debate. We don't want to get into this long story. Please, because it's imputing improper motive on the chair. So proceed with the debate, please. On the act, let's debate the act.
what I say in debate is constrained by the attitude of the chair to members on this side of the parliament. I raised the issue with you, members of my team, and we sat with you, and you anticipated what the concern was, and you drew our attention to a provision from parliamentary practice in New Zealand. And I want to share it with other members of the House. It has to do with references.
It has, but you see, we keep, your mic is off. Could you take your seat, member? You see, again and again, I want to caution the entire House on certain matters. So see what has happened. Honorable members of this House, I listened to a short piece of a radio program in which the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee is actually discussing matters that the Public Accounts Committee has already, like they started discussing. Now, in regards to the Privileges Committee, action can be taken against the member. I don't know, I mean, we have so many members who have been members of the House before, on the opposition side, on the government side. People can get advice from their former members. You cannot do those things. This is so obvious to me. You see, I'm going to again ask you to proceed in regards to the debate. If you cannot do that, then we'll have to just allow another member to speak. Let us go to the act. Please. Yes, proceed.
Mr. Speaker, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, an association of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is an international policy-making body that sets international money laundering standards and combating the financing of terrorism measures. The Caribbean Financial Action Task Force is the regional arm of the FATF. Dominica is a member of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. And Dominica's anti-money laundering, combating of the financing of terrorism framework comprises some very key pieces. You have the Ministry of Finance, which has oversight of the Financial Services Unit. You have the Prudential Oversight Authority, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. You have the Minister of Legal Affairs, who has responsibility for the Financial Intelligence Unit and the Money Laundering Supervisory Authority. Then there's the Office of the Attorney General. That is the regulator for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Act, the STFA, and the Ministry of National Security now, responsible for the Dominica Police Force as investigator of predicate offenses, and which has also been given special responsibilities under the Suppression of Financing of Terrorism Act. The November 2014 Caribbean Financial Action Task Force plenary recognized that Dominica had made significant progress in addressing the deficiencies identified in the 2009 Mutual Evaluation Report, and therefore could exit the follow-up process. So between 2009 and the end of 2014, Dominica passed the Money Laundering Prevention Act, number 8 of 2011, and amended it twice in 2013. Dominica passed broad, sweeping amendments to the Proceed of Crime Act, in 2010 and 2013, with further amendments in 2014. And Dominica also passed major amendments to the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Act number 3 of 2003 in 2011, with further amendments in 2013. So at that point, Dominica had progressed to the stage where legislative action addressed all of the deficiencies for the 13 core and key recommendations rated partially compliant or non-compliant, and at that time, only 3 recommendations were considered outstanding. So 8 years ago, Mr. Speaker, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force acknowledged the progress made by Dominica in improving the AML-CFT regime and noted that Dominica had established the legal and regulatory framework to meet its commitments regarding the strategic deficiencies that CFATF had identified, and Dominica was therefore removed from the CFATF monitoring program that required regular follow-up to biennial updates. So since then, Mr. Speaker, it appears you have been cruising along, noting the policy upgrades and legislative adjustments recommended by CFATF and making a few changes here and there, especially when threats emerged of being thrown on the OECD blacklist for non-compliance with evolving CFATF AML-CFT recommendations. In February 2020, at the start of this 10th Parliament, we amended the Money Laundering Prevention Act, number 8 of 2011. Today, we are meeting in emergency session for amendments to the Money Laundering Prevention Act, the Procedure of Crime Act, and the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Act. And we're doing that at the start of the same week in which CFATF in Dominica, I understand since the 15th of August, is conducting an in-country national risk review. We didn't learn about this review last week or the week before, you know. We have known about it years ago. But we are only now rushing the legislative action that needed to be taken in this Parliament to close the gaps and deficiencies on AML-CFT commitment to the world community as advised by CFATF. On August 3rd, 2022, a couple of weeks ago, the Financial Services Unit, the regulatory body, hosted industry officials, accountants, bankers, lawyers, in a mock interview intended to coach them into how they should answer questions posed to them in the National Risk Assessment exercise. But, Mr. Speaker, parliamentarians were only advised of this emergency meeting on August the 16th, 2022, 13 days after that FSU engagement to prepare for the CFATF review, and 1 day after CFATF was already in Dominica. Somebody or somebody's dropped the ball. Negligence, incompetence, disinterest, insincerity of purpose, all of the above? I don't know. But we have yet another amendment bill for the Money Laundering Prevention Act before us today. I ask the question though, how serious are we about money laundering prevention? How serious are we, really? Are we doing this to be in the good books of CFATF, to stay off the OECD blacklist, or are we doing this because we really believe that money laundering is a serious crime endangering national development and the advancement of global civilization that we are therefore committed to prevent in our piece of the globe? Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it does appear that with all that we have done at the behest of FATF and CFATF and the OECD, it appears that Dominica is almost like conditioning its criminal justice system into an aversion to prevent money laundering. We have had the Act for more than 11 years. How many money laundering investigations have we conducted? How many prosecutions have we pursued? How many convictions have we achieved? What do we have to demonstrate at this stage in terms of the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of our comprehensive anti-money laundering provisions? The absence of money laundering prosecutions and convictions simply tell us that existing legislation is not being used adequately, effectively, or at all. And Mr. Speaker, in Dominica, we are supposed to have a police force that is professional in conduct and responsive and effective in its operations. The police force is our premier law enforcement body, responsible to meet the changing demands of society in crime management, in investigation, in prosecution, in related action. The police force has a definitive and a very critical role to play in safeguarding the provisions of the constitutional rule of law by preserving the public peace, preventing and detecting crimes and offenses, and apprehending and causing to be apprehended persons who have committed or are charged with or suspected of having committed or having abetted the commission of or been about to commit a crime or an offense. Mr. Speaker, the offense of money laundering extends to property, regardless of value, which directly or indirectly represents the proceeds of crime, and includes money, investments, assets, and all other property, real or personal, heritable or movable, wherever situated, whether in Dominica or elsewhere, and includes any interest in such property. The Money Laundering Prevention Act provides at Section 3.1 that a person who receives, possesses, manages, invests, conceals or disguises, converts or transfers, disposes of or brings into or takes out of Dominica or engages in a transaction which involves property that is the proceeds of crime, knowing or believing the property to be proceeds of crime, commits an offense. Section 3.2 provides that a person who attempts, aids, abets, counsels, or procures the commission of or conspires to commit an offense under Section 1 commits an offense. The penalty, the money laundering penalty, at section 3, subsection 3, states that a person who is guilty of an offense under subsection 1 or 2 is liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding $5 million and to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years. As we meet today in the Parliament, in this Parliament, that is the law. And let me now make, Mr. Speaker, a reference to a person outside of the House, because I've learned, contrary to what we have said before, that there is nothing to prevent a member commenting severely on the conduct of people outside the House, but only if it is relevant to the debate before the House. Indeed, it is important for members to be free to speak out where this is necessary in the public interest. Members have been exhorted.
Let me just caution you, but also the chair would have to decide on whether it's relevant or not, and is it in line with the rules, so you can proceed. But I'm listening. Yes,
I promised you, Mr. Speaker, that my presentation would be well within the walls of 44.1, relevance. And I know that members have been exhorted to use this privilege responsibly with regard to people who cannot defend themselves in the chamber or vindicate themselves in a court of law, but this is left largely to the judgment of members. I don't intend to make any reference to someone outside the House, which could be regarded as so insulting by any section of this House that were it to stand unchallenged, it might provoke disorder. That would be a ground for requiring it to be withdrawn. So, Mr. Speaker, let me, in the public interest of sincerity in money laundering prevention, comment severely.
and therefore, would you take full responsibility? No, responsibility. If the House thinks what you have done is taking advantage of the privileges of the House, be careful. So let's proceed.
Mr. Speaker, let me, in the public interest of money laundering prevention sincerity, comment severely on the conduct of former Dominica diplomat Ali Reza Montfared, serving a 20-year jail term in Tehran for corruption on earth. From 2014, 3 years into the era of the Money Laundering Prevention Act.
So, Mr. Linton, before you proceed now, you need to indicate to me, in Dominica, was that person arrested in Dominica for money laundering? If it's yes, then you can proceed. If no, then we cannot go into that. No. Hear what I'm asking. We are talking about a bill. We're talking about a bill. So if the person was arrested for money laundering, under the Money Laundering Act, then it is relevant. If the person was not arrested in Dominica under this act, then we cannot make it be relevant.
So, Mr. Speaker, how could there be any conviction if there was no investigation?
Well, I don't know, but I don't know why you don't want to, in the bill, bring the person's name, because I'm not interested in what happened.
I said the name, Ali Reza Montfared.
Yes, but I'm saying let's do it properly. So I giving you the leeway that if he was arrested or charged in Dominica under this act, then yes, you can proceed. If not, then no. Yes, in Dominica, because yeah, it's not for now. For now, it's not relevant. For now, it is not relevant to call relevance. I told you what already. 44.1. Proceed, the Honorable Linton. I am asking you, do not go in that line of argument, because it is irrelevant to the debate, and also the gentleman was not charged or arrested under the act. Was irrelevant.
The man was a Dominican. Ali Reza Montfared was a
Where?
Yeah, Dominican. Yes, it's yours.
So proceed, Honorable Linton. I see your member is disturbing you, but proceed.
Yeah, you see, I can say what you're thinking. Every time you're doing that.
Let us proceed.
Continue.
Mr. Speaker, from 2014, 3 years into the era of the Money Laundering Prevention Act, through International Safe Oil, through First Islamic Investment Bank, Energy Solutions, Accra Prawn, Yellow Cab Taxi, and my Dominica Trade House, Alireza Monfared received, possessed.
Member, your mic is off because you are actually playing police now in the house, in this honorable house. You are saying that he was this, he was that. Yes, you cannot. I mean, these things are basic things. You cannot. You have, according to my time, it's 10:51. You were supposed to end at 10:57. So proceed. Okay. So that's it. Your mic, Senator, your mic. Hold on one sec. Nice. Press your mic now. No, we have a problem. Honorable Linton, your mic is on. Okay. Put it off now, no. Okay, good. Yes, proceed, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to add a few words or make a few words on the money laundering prevention amendment regulation or before the House. Money laundering, Mr. Speaker, is a global menace. It is a clear and present danger to our country and to any country, as a matter of fact. But what is most worrisome, Mr. Speaker, is that it is done in a very clandestine manner. We are all aware, Mr. Speaker, that the laundering of dirty money is a big business in the world. A business that can adversely affect our country or any country. And it is for this reason we in Dominica need to be very concerned about this practice because, Mr. Speaker, it can be said to be the fuel that expands criminal activities, and additionally, it can also be an obstruction to good governance. Mr. Speaker, any money laundering scandal is one too many for any country. Therefore, the call to close all gaps in our system is very timely. But in order to be effective, Mr. Speaker, for this here to be effective, our laws need to be applied rigidly and consistently. It is a fact that money laundering is a threat to our citizens and to our financial system. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this crime should not be underestimated. The loopholes that criminals can use to launder money into the country should be closed very tightly. There is also the need to further tighten up on the measures that should be taken to help protect the integrity and the safety of our financial system. And that is where the effective execution and enforcement of our laws come in. I wish to add, Mr. Speaker, that these amendments and the Act in its entirety should be clear of all political interference. The relevant branches of government should be allowed or should be given some teeth to ensure that due diligence is done on financial transactions, all financial transactions in general. Due diligence, Mr. Speaker, ought to be done regarding politically exposed persons. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, measures should be put in place to establish the source of wealth and source of funds associated with such persons. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this is enshrined in the reason for making these amendments, for taking the steps to close the door on money laundering and to stop criminals from lining their pockets with ill-gotten gains. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it is the politicians who should be the ears, the eyes, and every faculty of the law to ensure that it fulfills the purpose for which it has been enacted. But I must say, Mr. Speaker, that sometimes those barricades spring up so quickly, causing all hands, all hearts, all minds to go in a daze, and therefore the criminals get away scot-free. Mr. Speaker, it takes political will to get the right things done. Without political will, Mr. Speaker, this exercise today would be an exercise in futility. Mr. Speaker, what about building capacity among the persons responsible or whose responsibility it is to deal with such matters? This has to be done to ensure that they perform their duties in an effective, transparent, and just manner. It is also important, Mr. Speaker, to clarify the roles of these people, those involved in the prevention of money laundering. Because we do not want to be caught in a tangled web of role overload or role ambiguity. I'm referring here, Mr. Speaker, to the key players in the process: the Financial Services Unit, the customs unit, the police unit, or financial institutions, and others, Mr. Speaker. The proposed rules or laws should provide for all to be extremely knowledgeable in order to effectively exercise vigilance regarding suspicious transactions. And this, again, I will say, should be done without political interference. Let them do their work. Let these institutions, these units, do their work. Mr. Speaker, as I said, in order to be effective, there's an urgent need to fill the gaps, to tighten the knots that may exist in our laws and our policies regarding the issue at hand. Everyone must play a part to ensure that the necessary steps are taken to mitigate the risks associated with money laundering. Mr. Speaker, all reasonable steps must be taken to demonstrate to all the international community that we are determined to, and we are being proactive in preventing the proceeds of crime from being laundered through our financial institutions and in Dominica as a whole. Let me reiterate: required personnel should boldly exercise the authority given them under the law to take action regarding these criminal activities without fear and without favor. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, where any responsible officer falls short of executing the duty regarding money laundering, that officer should be held accountable for the actions. Because, Mr. Speaker, such behaviors are nothing more than abuse of the system and can plunge our country into serious trouble. We are well aware, Mr. Speaker, that it takes years to build a reputation. But one simple mistake, and what took you years to build, can be destroyed in seconds. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we need to do all it takes to make money laundering into this country close to impossible, or very difficult. Mr. Speaker, as I close, let me remind this honorable House that you do not just pass laws in a vacuum. As Newton's third law of motion states, to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So there must have been some reaction to trigger this amendment. The Anti-Money Laundering Act, as the leader of the opposition has just stated, has been in place for a while, 2011. Have there been any convictions? If so, maybe very few. Our challenge, Mr. Speaker, is not the absence of the law, but the enforcement of the law. Money laundering cases may have been few, yet the laws are amended to significantly increase the fines. I don't know, I must have missed out on something. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, I will take comfort in the fact that this amendment is being done to help protect the integrity and the safety of our country and its financial institution or its financial system, thus making money laundering in this country more complicated for the criminal. On that note, Mr. Speaker, I wish to support the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to make a very short intervention on the bill before us to amend the Money Laundering Prevention Act, which is very administrative in nature. We are part of a global architecture. We don't only have responsibilities to ourselves, we have responsibilities to all of the nations in the world. There are those who will come and seek to impute improper motives. There will be those who want to come and cast aspersions on this country. But the good thing is, Mr. Speaker, that the regional and international community continues to applaud this government and this country for its steadfastness. We've always recognized our responsibilities as a government. You know, I have had exchanges of words with the OECD and the European Union publicly in what I consider to be their insensitive approach to engaging us former colonies. And I want to commend them today for reacting in a positive way to our criticisms. And today, the OECD and the European Union have been approaching this engagement with respect, mutual respect. And so I want to say to my friend, the head of mission in Barbados, thank you very much for communicating our very strong message to the European Union. I also want to place on record in this Parliament Dominica's thanks to CIFATEF for their continued advice, guidance, and technical support in assisting us in our efforts to strengthen all our security apparatus, whether it's legislation, whether it's training, whether it is capacity building. They have been very helpful in this regard. We are, as I said, we are part of a global community, and there is peer evaluation. We will form part of teams that will go to other countries and help them examine what they have done, what they're doing, and what they need to do, and make recommendations. Likewise, other countries will come here as part of a team to do the same. We, from a national standpoint, with regards to the National Advisory Committee, from time to time, we'll examine what we have done, what we are doing, what we need to do, and where that National Advisory Committee, that is chaired by the Honorable Attorney General, identifies certain gaps, they will advise the Cabinet on these actions, and we will take those actions, as is the case today. That's why we're in the Parliament. We're in the Parliament because the National Advisory Team, in its own assessment and evaluation, recognizes that there are a few gaps which we believe would be advantageous to the country and to our global commitment if we do come to Parliament to amend it. That's what it is. And so, and the point is, Mr. Speaker, whether it is the peer review people who recommend to us to do it, or we do it ourselves, that is inconsequential, really. What is important is what has the government done in reaction to that advice. The government has taken the political decision that we will proceed with the amendments and come to the Parliament, whether it's in an emergency sitting or whether we take 3 months of notice to come to the Parliament. But the point is, and that we have stopped everything we're doing as a government and to give urgent attention to this matter. And so when people come and talk about political will and seeking to cast aspersions, Mr. Speaker, it's not by words you determine somebody's political will or anybody's will. It's by your deeds and your actions. And this government has brought respectability to our country by our engagement with the international community. We come here and we talk about, for example, Mr. Speaker, he's mentioned it, Montferrat. Montferrat did not commit any crime in Dominica. He committed a crime allegedly in Iran. The Iranian government wanted him. They asked for him, they got him, and he is serving time in Iran. Justice has been served. But let's look, Mr. Speaker, what caused us to be blacklisted between 1995 and 2000. And we seeking to give protection to international criminals. When countries did not want them, Australia wanted certain criminals brought back to the country. And in exchange for money, the government of the day wanted to bring these criminals here in Dominica to avoid being subjected to the laws of Australia. Do we have short memories in this country, Mr. Speaker? I don't. I'm a student of history. You understand? And also aspersions, Mr. Speaker. We in this country, you see, I sat here.
Yeah, members.
No interruptions, you know.
Members, and do not call people name in cross-talk.
I could have stood up and objected to many things that were said there. All of the casting of aspersions, I could have stood up in accordance to the rules and objected. But now I'm speaking, I'm not given the opportunity to speak in peace. Why? 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 Here you go, Mr. Speaker. Here you go. Here you go. Here you go. So, Mr. Speaker, I am in full support of this. And I've said I met with CFATF, Mr. Speaker, the peer review people, last week, and as I've said to the European Union and others, that I believe that we need to sit down, all of us, in the global space, and to look at this situation comprehensively. And let us look at the creation of one umbrella legislation that could be a standard legislation across the global space. Because this is a movement. We have come to Parliament numerous times numerous times to make amendments to legislation to play our part in protecting our country and protecting the global space. They sometimes appear to be nuisances, but they're important. And so, very well, we may come back here in a few months' time to make further amendments. Because the reality is, in all defense to CFATF and the European Union, OECD, and to the National Advisory Committee, this is a moving target. The world is a dynamic world. Things which confronted investigative units 10 and 15 and 20 years ago, times have changed in society. A day is a long time. And so we have to continue reviewing, assessing, evaluating, and to see where we have to make changes to strengthen our legal framework, to strengthen our capacity, to strengthen or improve our training, so that our people who are involved and on the front line have the knowledge and the skills and the competencies to counteract those actions of money laundering and criminal activity in our country. And just to show you our commitment, Mr. Speaker, our commitment as a government and the political will that the senator seeks to reference in a usual condescending way and disrespectful way, Mr. Speaker. In the middle of COVID-19, when revenue dropped by 33+% and expenditure increased by 42%, I authorized the purchase of scanners at $2.5 million, Mr. Speaker, in 2020, to be placed at the ports to scan every container coming to the country. And when some on the opposition came here during the budget debate and said that the number of barrels dropped, people no longer importing, you know why did not the barrels drop? Because the scanners are working to prevent drugs and ammunition coming to our country, and as a means of facilitating money laundering in Dominica. So I don't have to come here with written notes that somebody wrote for me, as they have done for yourselves. The truth doesn't have to be written. Lies are written. Deceptive comments are made, carefully crafted to give the international community that something is wrong in Dominica. And please don't give Dominica any clean bin of health. Let's blacklist Dominica. And believe it's Roosevelt's carried the blacklisting. This is not my country alone. This is our country, to be bequeathed to our children, and they want to denigrate it and went to collude with anti-Dominican elements, Senator John Feen, to undermine the integrity and the sustainability of our country. So, Mr. Speaker, you see, that's the problem with these people here. People wrote speeches for them, and you'll see them come and read it. And I know the crafters of the speeches. This is a small country. There's nothing I don't know in Dominica, Mr. Speaker. I know when they got it. I know how she got it. I know who gave it to her. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, what's the insult? Can you stand, please, and tell me what's the insult, madam? Please. What's wrong with that? That's an insult? What insult? Who wrote your speech? Who wrote your speech?
Midnight on Thursday night. That's when I got. That's when I wrote my speech. Midnight on Thursday night, I got my speech.
Honorable Prime Minister, proceed. I mean, this is a little back and forth. I mean, Somebody wrote your speech, I'm in come.
Mr. Speaker, the senator, 90%, 90%. That is why I am calling on you to rise up, to be diligent, and not to seek to undermine our country. That's why I'm calling on you. 90% of what you said this morning was cast aspersions about political will and this and that and undermining the security forces and the police and the FIU and the FSU. Everything you said there was carefully crafted to send a message to those who are present here in Dominica that something untoward is happening in Dominica. That's what it is. That's what it is. But the good thing about it, Mr. Speaker, and dear Dominicans, is that the people who we engage and the people who engage us know us. They know me. I'm a straightforward person. I tell them as it is, but in a respectful way. But that has never compromised our ability to take action proactively, preemptively, or even on advice or suggestion. We have done it. No arguments, we do it. And you come here, if you want information, you ask a question. You don't make a statement. And when you make a statement, oh, how many cases you have investigated, you don't know. You ask. But you say, no cases have been investigated, or few. How do you know that? Nobody has been brought to court. How do you know? Ask a question. Ask a question. That is what it is. There's a difference. And that's the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker. So we're here. We felt it was necessary that while the peer review people are here, there's nothing, it's transparently done. While they're here as part of the evaluation, that it would be advantageous to Dominica to come to the Parliament to pass the legislation. We could have left it for next month, for December, but to whose benefit? To whose benefit? And so I want to commend the Attorney General, the Minister for National Security, and the National Advisory Committee. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, the volume of work that's involved in this exercise on an ongoing basis, we may very well have to come to a point in all of our jurisdictions in the Caribbean to have a ministry dedicated to this, Because it is voluminous work, it is tedious work, but it is necessary work. And I want to commend all those who have been hours and hours, diligently going for this thing and ensuring that our country can be registered as being compliant in our efforts to countering the financing of terrorism, the financing of criminal activity, or prevention of money laundering. And so I want to commend on this closing note, Mr. Speaker, all those who were involved in this, to say that this is very simple. We should just say yay and move on. But we're here instead, folks are here instead casting aspersions on the country, trying to say, well, boy, good move with legislation, but the political will and so on. If people had to rely on what the opposition have been saying to Dominica, Dominica would be blacklisted by every single entity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable member, your mic. Before you proceed, I just wanted to just re-emphasize the point. Why I want to really, and all judges have different approaches. In the American system, you have the Supreme Court, and sometimes on the same Supreme Court, different judges interpret the law different ways and have their opinion. For me, while I am the person sitting in the chair, I am saying that I would not accept anybody talking or bringing names in the house unless if it is something to congratulate a person, something positive. Also, I do not want us to end up in a slippery slope where people have to be responding about somebody's name and back and forth. That's all I'm trying to do. That's all I'm trying to do. So let us stay on a positive note, healthy debate, and let's proceed. So Honorable John, so you can proceed, but I just wanted to point that out. To strengthen the debate, you don't necessarily have to call somebody name. Why is that necessary? So on that matter, because I ruled on it, on that matter, I've ruled on it. I'm saying you can call a name if this is a matter of substantial. That's what we actually debating. So if we are debating that XYZ committed a crime in Dominica and we bring it to the house to debate it, then you have no choice but to call the name. That's what we're debating. But if you debating money laundering, you cannot bring in a person's name unless if it is really relevant to the debate. That's all I'm saying. Because I want us to get involved in a slippery slope. So, Honorable John, please proceed.
Just the opposition. Every parliament will have slippery slope.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I stand in not in my usual jovial man. I'm not encouraged, Mr. Speaker. I've been coming to this house since 2010. And for the past couple of sittings, I'm not encouraged to be in this house. I was elected to be here, so I will be here on behalf of the people. But Mr. Speaker, we are not given the opportunity as members, elected members of this house, on this side, Mr. Speaker, to speak on the issues, to debate. Parliament is to parley. I'm not saying we should have to disrespect anybody, but to debate the issues. Constructive criticism, that's what helps foster growth and development. Mr. Speaker, this morning, as we debate the Money Laundering Act, I feel this, just a few comments that have been made, is ruffling some feathers in the Parliament. And these comments, Mr. Speaker, are geared towards advancing the money laundering legislation. As we heard our speakers before me on this side, supporting the legislation because going forward, we want to ensure that Dominica is complying with all the different regulations, the different institutions across the globe, OECD, FATF, and all the others. Mr. Speaker, money laundering, earlier on, Senator John Finn made a mention about money laundering cases in Dominica. And I'll make reference quickly to 6 from March 2021. March 31st. The first one, Mr. Speaker, was a press conference held by the police, the former commissioner of police, and it stated that members of the Dominica Police Force, along with officers of the Customs and Excise Department, executed a search warrant for cash at an apartment located at Comfort Cottages in Teplat, Paybush. And I quote, during the search, a large quantity of U.S. states currency equivalent to Eastern Caribbean dollars, $1,322,607.27 was recovered. As a result, 2 men, I'll not call the men name, from Woodford, one from St. Joseph and one from Woodfordale, were arrested on suspicion of money laundering. And he said the men were released pending an investigation by the Financial Intelligence Unit, FIU, but did not dismiss possibility of rearresting and charging on a later date. But, Mr. Speaker, have we heard anything about this matter, money laundering? Activity happened at Teplat. 500,000 US dollars. What we have heard. Mr. Speaker, the next
Mr.
one.
Speaker,
It
Mr.
was
Speaker.
money laundering.
Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, you stand on a point of order? Yes, Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
because, Mr. Speaker, the member is talking on a matter that is being investigated.
So it is being investigated, so it's sub judice.
Of course, it has to
Okay.
be, because he said
Yeah.
that he does not know where it is.
Yes,
So
yes.
before he comes to the parliament and raise it, he must find out where it is, whether
Yes.
the matter is still being investigated
Yes.
or before the courts.
Yeah.
And if he cannot prove that to us, then he cannot speak about it in the parliament.
I agree with you. Take your seat. Yes, member.
Mr.
You,
Speaker.
member, hold on.
Mr.
Hold on, let me
Speaker.
just ask a question.
Well, can I answer?
Yes, yes. But I haven't asked a question.
The member raised a concern.
Yes.
Can I answer?
Yes. Respond.
These 6 matters of money laundering, information that is in the public space. I have not said I have no information of what was said in the court. These are information that is in the public space. Press conferences held by the police. Press releases by the police. Press releases by the FIU.
Yes.
Where is the sub judice? These are just general information. I am just making reference to cases of money laundering that happened in Dominica from March 2021.
Yes.
Where we are on it, I am not going to any details.
Okay. Yes.
Any specifics.
Yes.
Has that been proven?
Yes.
That is a money laundering related matter?
He can say what the police said, but he cannot conclude on the matter because it's sub judice. But if it's in the public space, then yes, proceed. You can say it in the public space, and you cannot make any inferences. But again, be careful. If you're going to list the cases, that's it.
Yes.
But you cannot go down in discussion on the cases. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Yes.
If I may.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I don't recall, I know the incident he's referred to, but
Yes.
I can't recall the specifics. But since the member is the person bringing it, he obviously would need to have the facts, because it's factual.
Yes.
I see you've accepted that it's money laundering. I don't know that that is the fact. I know there was an announcement that a certain sum of money was recovered by the police in an operation in that location, and there are other locations that certain sums of money were recovered. They may or may not be matters related to money laundering. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what stage that matter is either.
Yes.
But I'll also say that some of these instances where cash has been recovered, as far as I'm aware, sometimes they're dealt with by other avenues. Customs have other ways of dealing with them and so on. And some of those monies have found their way into the asset forfeiture fund. So I'm not objecting to what the Speaker is saying, but I don't know the facts. I'm just saying, Mr. Speaker, that if he's going to go down that route, must establish that what he's saying is factual. So, for example, if the report that he is citing says that it's money laundering, then I think he's at liberty to refer to
Yes.
it.
But you see, in the case where, and you pointed out, the Honorable Minister pointed out, in the case where we don't know exactly the details, that's what I'm saying, and I agree with him, he can mention it, but he cannot go in any details on the matter. You know, because if he's actually saying that he don't know where it is, that means it is sub judice, so he can just mention, but he cannot go in details. Proceed.
Can I repeat?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, these matters can go on a Dominica News Online, it can go on government website, it can go anywhere. These matters are in the public space. I am just raising them because we're in Parliament discussing money laundering.
Yes, you can, so
said
proceed. That's what I'm saying. I've ruled on
AG
it.
and everybody.
Honorable member, I've ruled that you can mention. Nothing is wrong with this.
Okay. The second matter, Mr. Speaker, at the same press conference, a former commissioner of police revealed that a senior employee of the Labor Division, one employee of the Inland Revenue Division, and an employee of the Ministry of Health assisting police in an investigation.
But in that matter, you cannot go into that
No, I am
unless
not
it is.
going into
Yes, you cannot. You cannot. You cannot. Yes, you cannot.
Why I cannot?
Yes.
Why I can't raise the money laundering case?
Mr. Speaker, on a point of
Yes, but you're not sure if it's money laundering or whatever. So, yes, Minister.
on a point of order.
Yes.
The member has a right to speak, but you cannot seek to litigate issues that are before the
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. You cannot.
And especially in the case where you have people who have been charged criminally.
Yes.
Before the honorable, before the.
Yeah, you can't. You
This is
can't.
the highest court in the land.
Yes.
That notwithstanding doesn't mean that any member has the right to litigate issues.
Yes, no, I agree with you already. So, yes, proceed, but you cannot. This one specifically, you cannot. Because you see, remember, the piece of legislation is about money laundering. Yes. So you cannot take any court matter and bring in the debate on money laundering. So if, for example, it's a sexual case, you cannot bring it in the argument of money laundering. So you see, I give you a little liberty, but this is a little dicey. So proceed.
But I have never...
If you deal with them one by one, if you want to list them, I tell you cannot go down on this one. So continue.
I have not entered in any details. I have just taken what is in the public space.
But you see, we don't know what you're going to say. That's the problem.
That's what I'm saying. I have not, why everybody's on edge? I have not said anything out of the, we are speaking about money laundering regulations, amending money laundering regulations in this house. I am raising a few money laundering cases or arrests that were made, and I have not gone to any details. I am just taking what is in the public space, what was said by the police, what was said by the FIU head. Why is it ticklish? What was said in the Director of Audit report? Why is it a problem? Are we afraid of speaking about money laundering in this house? We are the highest house of the land.
Member,
and we came in here.
Proceed.
We came in here, Mr. Speaker. No,
yes.
Mr. Speaker.
Just proceed.
We came. I am proceeding.
Yes.
We came in here on emergency, Mr. Speaker, to discuss this issue. We came here to give support. We've been making constructive criticism, and we've been interrupted every time we make a comment.
Why? I wonder why.
Why?
The question has been asked.
He asked a question, so he stood up.
Cool yourself for a second.
Relax yourself.
Cool yourself. Cool yourself.
You're a little boy. Who you talking to?
Who you little boy?
You have a little boy.
Let's step out and see who's little boy.
Relax yourself first.
Little boy what?
Yes. AG, proceed.
Little boy, not me.
Why you behave
AG,
yourself?
proceed.
Behave yourself. You all believe Astafan sell it? God said Astafan don't sell it.
Relax yourself.
Don't play with me, boy. Play the others, not with me.
Don't play with
Yes, proceed.
Let's go here as a joker.
Yeah, no, I'm a joker? Well, check me on as a joker.
Proceed, please.
Mr. Speaker, the problem with the members of the opposition is all they have is that what Lugue, the member for Rosewood North, has. The same thing that made him go on a political platform and say if he wasn't a Christian, what he would do. Mr. Speaker, the reality of this is simple, and why they cannot understand basics.
Mr. Speaker, that's allowed in the House.
It's allowed, you said it.
That's allowed in the House.
You said it.
No, but you said it, so it's a point of fact. So proceed.
Did it.
Sit down.
One parent did it.
Sit down.
You are in the house to defend yourself. Proceed, AG.
The problem they have is they don't take the time. For example, remember for Salisbury, the point that's trying to be made to him is not that he cannot say what he's saying, it's whether it is in the correct place. For example, you're talking about monies that were recovered. I stood up and I thought I was assisting, but you seem to think otherwise. But I'll try to be a little clearer. It may well be that what you're saying can be said in relation to the
proceeds of crime act. That's what I was thinking.
Which is another bill to be discussed.
And then you anticipate in the debate now.
But you're talking about money laundering. The mere fact that monies have been recovered doesn't establish that it is to do with money laundering. So that is always say, if you know it to do with money laundering, then fine, you can talk about it. That's the point, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
That's all.
The FIU said it is.
Nobody's trying to stop you from saying it.
Continue, Mr. Speaker, I hear.
No, you can proceed. You can proceed. But the rules allowed for a person to stand on a point of order. I cannot prevent this. But you are interrupting in crosstalk over and over. So, any other member wishes to speak? Okay. Honorable Bakmo, your mic before. Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to briefly lend my support to the matter before the House under debate. Mr. Speaker, this is not a process that is new to us, Mr. Speaker. We have been engaged with this process for years, Mr. Speaker. It was in 1999, 98 that we first encountered the issue of Dominica being blacklisted, Mr. Speaker. And ever since we came to power in 2000, this government has had to amend a number of pieces of legislation, Mr. Speaker, to come into conformity with the requirements of the international community, and more so the OECD, and like members before me have said, the FATF, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, because blacklisting and the other measures that can be taken against a government and against a country, Mr. Speaker, can impose severe difficulty on you, especially in your banking system. If your corresponding banking relationships are interfered with, truncated, Mr. Speaker, or interrupted, that can impede your ability to transact with the international community. And that is why it is so very important to comply with the dictates, Mr. Speaker, of the FATF, Mr. Speaker. And so that is what we've been trying to do. I mean, this process, like I said, I was Attorney General a number of years ago and before me, Mr. Speaker, and it is a continuous, almost an annual process that we must undergo review to make sure that our systems, not only our laws, our banking systems, our financial framework, Mr. Speaker, our commercial architecture is in conformity with global expectations. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, you are placed under severe constraints that will, like I said, impede your ability to transact and to conduct business in the international community. And that is what we are trying to do. And as responsible legislators in this honorable House, we should be here in a bipartisan attempt to pass these pieces of legislation and let us move on with the issue of governance. And note I say governance because that is what we are involved with on both sides of the House, Mr. Speaker. Because we use the word opposition, it doesn't mean that the opposition have to come here and oppose everything. You have a responsibility to rise as a statesman. There is a time for playing politics on the platform and at the grassroots level. But when we come here, Mr. Speaker, it is expected that we will rise to the occasion and we will lead our constituents, and which is the nation. And that is what we are trying to do here. And I'm not saying that the members of the opposition or even members of government cannot point out issues that may result in constructive criticism that we can take on board even at the committee stage and perhaps amend the bill to make it stronger, Mr. Speaker. But when we go into irrelevancies like Monfred, Mr. Speaker, but that opens the door for us on this side, Mr. Speaker, to speak about issues, Mr. Speaker. Here it is that we had prominent members of society, an attorney at law, and a former prime minister, Mr. Speaker, involved in blatant acts of money laundering, Mr. Speaker, trying to bring in money into the country and quote on humanitarian grounds and saying that they want to create a buffer on behalf of the leader of the opposition. That is a clear attempt at money laundering. But we don't want to go into that, Mr. Speaker. We can go into that, Mr. Speaker, but we don't see the need to go into that because we thought that the piece of legislation would have been clear for all members of the House to understand, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, and I agree if you cannot go into it.
No, Mr. Speaker, I would not go there, Mr. Speaker. I would not go there, Mr. Speaker. So we can comment. I'm not going there, Mr. Speaker. We can comment, Mr. Speaker. We can comment, Mr. Speaker, on present and past members of this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, going all the way to Switzerland, Mr. Speaker, to bring in monies via businesses, Mr. Speaker, that were prominently connected to politicians in Dominica, Mr. Speaker. And we could go there, but we're not going to do that, Mr. Speaker, because that is not our purpose for the passage of the bill, Mr. Speaker. That is not, we will not go there, Mr. Speaker. So you see, no, we will not go there, Mr. Speaker. Those instances of money laundering, Mr. Speaker, are clear, Mr. Speaker. on humanitarian grounds and passports for charity. We will not go there. And nobody has been arrested to this day. Nobody has been brought in for questioning. And that is what the resolution seeks to prevent, Mr. Speaker. Not to allow those acts of circumventing the laws to bring in funding into the country, Mr. Speaker, on nefarious grounds. That is what the piece of legislation is seeking, Mr. Speaker, to achieve for all of us, so that we have a clear, law-abiding citizenry, Mr. Speaker, and a country that is known, Mr. Speaker, to operate above board. That is what we're seeking here to achieve. So for the members of the opposition really to be bringing extraneous matters into the debate really is a waste of our time, really. We shouldn't be here doing that. It's a serious waste of time. When you have serious ministers running serious ministries and senior public officers who have to sit here, Mr. Speaker, and really, taking things that are really irrelevant to the debate before this House, is really a misuse of our time, Mr. Speaker, and an abuse of the time of the people of this country. So with those short words, I just wanted to clear the air, Mr. Speaker, and make people listening and those of us in here understand and know the process of what we are engaging right now. And all we are trying to do is to pass and amend the Money Laundering Prevention Act, which is in existence in Dominica already. It's not even a new piece of legislation that we're trying to introduce, Mr. Speaker. It is an infrastructure that has been in place and has been working, and a number of persons have been brought to the court, Mr. Speaker. We cannot line them, but we don't really want to call people's names in here, Mr. Speaker. We cannot line them. So we live in Dominica. We listen to the media. We know what is happening in the country, Mr. Speaker, and that is what we are trying to do. So I just wanted to make those points and to clarify that so that we can move ahead and get the business of the people done in this honorable House. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, I too want to express my support for this amendment bill. As the member for Portsmouth, Minister for Trade, just indicated, this is not a new piece of legislation. It is merely an amendment to existing legislation, and legislation that has been debated in this House on a number of previous occasions. Mr. Speaker, it really ought not to be contentious at all. The speakers, at least two of the speakers on the opposite side, who opened their address by saying that they support the bill. It's unfortunate that they either couldn't stop there or that they couldn't confine the rest to saying things which were essentially supportive. Mr. Speaker, the member for Marigot, in his address, made reference to the fact that there were previous amendments, and he referred to 2013, and he referred to CPATF giving, as it were, a clean bill of health to Dominica and its legislative framework insofar as money laundering was concerned. And he went on to indicate and to ask, why is it that in the week or in the period that the CPATF assessors are in Dominica, that we are here in Parliament in what he referred to as an emergency session to pass further amendments? Well, Mr. Speaker, the answer to that really is quite simple. As has been indicated, and as happened actually in 2013, that he referred to, the process under which jurisdictions are assessed, or the mutual evaluation process, which is undertaken by CPATF, is an ongoing process. It's a process that all 24 member countries of CPATF has to undergo. And as has been indicated, it is a form of peer review. Now, there's nothing complicated or indeed sinister about it. But the reality is that as time goes by, and there is a continuous process, there's continuous change, FATF, that's the international body to which CPATF is aligned, comes up with new provisions or requirements that each jurisdiction must conform with. And in particular, when one is coming up to the mutual evaluation, as part of that process, there are special steps and procedures that occur. Generally around 6 months before the on-site examination, and Dominica is currently, as you've heard, undergoing its on-site. Roughly about 6 months before, the Secretariat, CPATF Secretariat engages with the jurisdiction, in this case Dominica, and begins to map out the way forward to that on-site. And in our case, we had engagements around about November, and we had a continuous engagement with the CIVATF Secretariat. And in February, we received and had to deal with what's known as a technical compliance questionnaire, which is a substantial document of a number of hundred pages, which the jurisdiction had to engage in that. The technical working group set out, did the necessary work, research, and responses to respond to that questionnaire. That's a substantial body of work, Mr. Speaker. It's not that people are sitting around twiddling their thumbs doing nothing. There's a lot of work that's been done by many people, most of them public officers, who get criticized and vilified on occasion, unfairly and unjustly. And they work silently in the background, oftentimes without getting any praise, acknowledgement, and some may say without getting sufficient monetary award or reward. Well, Mr. Speaker, they are working, and they're working diligently. The purpose of that work is to ensure that Dominica, as a jurisdiction, adheres to the recommendations and regulations and requirements that it has to, so that we can ensure that we are doing our part to protect Dominica and our financial system, but also the international system as a whole, because we are part of that system. So, Mr. Speaker, of course, an element of what is happening is to satisfy the requirements of CIVATF, but it's also to satisfy requirements that are essential to our progress or development and are essential to us as a jurisdiction. But it is in the process of this ongoing review that takes place in that confined 6 months or thereabout that one gets to examine all of the legislation in detail in a manner that one would not ordinarily do, because it should stand as a matter of common sense that in no jurisdiction can it be expected that those 15 volumes that are there can be gone over in minute detail on a day-to-day basis. So it is when one is undertaking the sort of exercise that has been going on over the past number of months, using the relevant legislation against the recommendations as they have been revised and updated by the international regulatory body, that one looks at each recommendation, one looks at the relevant legislation alongside it, one sees to what extent one is in compliance, to what extent one may be deficient, and to what extent one would have to adjust one's legislation to address that deficiency or those deficiencies. And out of that comes these regulations, these bills, these recommendations to address those issues. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is, in summary, the process. So it is not possible or realistic to expect that these things could have been addressed many months ago, because it's only when one does that fine-tooth comb operation going through the laws that one gets to identify these issues. So that deals with that point, Mr. Speaker. The other point that I wanted to address, Mr. Speaker, is this, that a member spoke about effectiveness. And it's a good point, the effectiveness, because we can introduce legislation, we can enact legislation. But of course, if that legislation is not effective, it's questionable as to whether that is really a viable exercise. But that, Mr. Speaker, is one of the elements of this fourth round of mutual evaluations that is taking place, because effectiveness as a component, a significant component, was only brought in relation to the fourth round. So what is happening now is one has to have the legislation and other requirements as a framework, and then one has to judge the effectiveness as to the output, what comes out of it. And so that leads, Mr. Speaker, to the issue, again, an insinuation that they are not prosecutions. Well, there are prosecutions, and there have also been convictions. I don't have the specific figures, but I'm sure that those are figures that could be produced if it is that the members on the other side believe it is of sufficient significance. No doubt they will table a question at some point, and they will get an answer from the relevant technical authorities. But I can say, without fear of contradiction, that there have been and are ongoing prosecutions, and that there have been convictions. I can also say, Mr. Speaker, that in amongst what we are dealing with today is a recognition of the need to constantly update and to increase the effectiveness. That is why, Mr. Speaker, Clause 4 of the bill that we are now considering, the Money Laundering Prevention Act of 2022, Clause 4, which deals with an amendment to Section 3 of the Parent Act, one will see that it says, Mr. Speaker, a person, which would be subsection 3 of Section 3 in the amended form, a person who is guilty of an offense under subsection 1 or subsection 2 is liable, A, on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $500,000 and to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 7 years if he is a natural person, and 2, a fine not exceeding $5 million if he is a body corporate, and B, talks about the final conviction on indictment in relation. Now, if one looks at the substantive piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, one will see that at Section 3, as it currently stands, it simply says a person who is guilty of an offense under subsection 1 or 2, an offense, no reference to summary, is liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding $5 million and to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years. So that's only dealing with a person. It doesn't address the corporate person or the legal person, and it doesn't address the issue of summary offenses. Now, one of the significance of that latter point, Mr. Speaker, is this, that it is far more difficult and challenging to prosecute indictable offenses. That is to say, for those who don't understand it, indictable offenses are triable only in the High Court. You have to have a preliminary inquiry into that. It's in the magistrate's court, and then maybe if the magistrate's court believes there's sufficient evidence for a trial, it then goes up to the High Court. There's another process in the High Court. Time, and also resources, and also challenges and greater difficulties in getting a conviction. So the introduction of a summary offense, Mr. Speaker, is indeed a significant step in seeking to address the issue of effectiveness so as to increase the probability of those prosecuting for money laundering to have the opportunity of being able to secure more convictions. That is further underlined and indeed emphasized, Mr. Speaker, by Clause 7 of this same Amendment Act, which amends Section 28 in subsection 2 by deleting the words liable on conviction and substituting the words liable on summary conviction. So, Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation is doing precisely what my honorable friends on the other side of the House have indicated they would like to be done, which is to increase the effectiveness of our money laundering legislation. So I'm sure that I will hear them all cheering on, Mr. Speaker. Well, you see, Mr. Speaker, this is where we have it. I mean, the honourable member for Salisbury says on paper. How do you help somebody like that? I don't think you can, Mr. Speaker.
Very difficult. Very difficult.
No, Mr. Speaker, other members also made reference to the manpower or personal power or human resource. Now, the reality is that we are a small jurisdiction, and sometimes, Mr. Speaker, in our efforts, and I say our to be friendly, but I'm really speaking of the members of the opposition, and in this misguided perception of opposing, rather than support, which is what happens in many other jurisdictions when you have this type of legislation, both sides of the House recognize that this is a national issue. It is not a party issue. This is a national issue. If Dominica is challenged with sanction, whether you want to call it blacklisting, which I don't like because as far as I'm concerned, blacklisting is associated with everything negative or bad is supposed to be black. I prefer, Mr. Speaker, negative listing, but that's me. So I'm not into the blacklisting stuff, but in negative listing, if we as a country are negative listed, the result of that is not going to fall on Labour Party supporters, or even opposition supporters, or even people who have no political persuasion. It will fall on all Dominicans. So this is a national issue that you should be looking at. Is this in national interest? Yes or no? If yes, support it unequivocally. Don't support it with ifs and buts and maybes, unless those ifs, buts, and maybes are genuine. Unless those ifs, buts, and maybes are genuine. You should be making suggestions to improve the thing, not simply wishful, like if. If you don't know if the thing is a problem, why are you raising it? Why are you raising it? Mr. Speaker, I really, as it is today, as may have been seen from my earlier intervention, I really am losing patience because I feel that all of us are adults and all of us are well aware of the role that we should play in this house and in this society. And it is really annoying to see that we have a situation where we come to the house time after time, and there is no attempt in most instances at bona fide contribution. If you take your mask off, I'll be able to watch you in your face even better. I said a while ago that I really am fed up, and that is exactly what I am, and I am not taking any prisoners anymore, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, reference was made to follow your leader now. Your leader took his bag and go. Follow your leader now. He took his bag and go. Follow him now. Okay, well, sit down there and get some wisdom. Mr. Speaker, reference was made to political will. The idea that anybody can realistically suggest that this government has not demonstrated political will in relation to money laundering and other criminal offenses, but we're dealing at this moment with money laundering, is absurd to the highest degree. Mr. Speaker, the legislation that this government has brought to this House to pass in support of ensuring that money laundering regulations are as tight as they may be is clear for all to see. And indeed, by their own pronouncement earlier, they acknowledged that. Mr. Speaker, it is very difficult to understand the craven ignorance displayed over and over again. I will sit down, but not before I address you verbally in this House, because you all need to understand that this House is a debate chamber. If you want to have your political speeches, they are available on the political platform, and that's why you all are constantly in difficulty with the Speaker of the House. It doesn't matter who they put as Speaker of the House. They can get an apostle to put there. You all have a problem because you all do not understand their rules, and you must follow the rules. So, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Rosenau would like to know the relevance. The relevance, Mr. Speaker, of this is that money laundering, and in particular, this bill, the Money Laundering Prevention Bill of 2022, is a solid piece of legislation which will go a long way to assisting us going forward. I should just say this, Mr. Speaker, maybe two final things. One is that at this point in time, I should let all members of this House and those who are listening understand the ongoing nature. We are in the fourth round. Dominica, we have the on-site. The assessors from CPATF are here for the rest of this week. They shall leave. When they leave, they will give an oral initial report. They will return, and then in a short space of time, they will give a first draft of a written report. We as a jurisdiction will have the opportunity to respond to that first draft. Again, we have a timeline within which we have to respond to that first draft. They will take into account all comments and recommendation submissions. They will submit to us a second draft, which we will again have an opportunity to respond to as a jurisdiction, and they will thereafter conclude the final report, the mutual evaluation report. That report, Mr. Speaker, will be considered at a plenary, all being well, or certainly scheduled to be considered at a plenary in May of 2023, that's May next year. At that plenary, the jurisdiction will, of course, be required to, if you will, defend or position. The report will be presented to the plenary, which consists of all of the 24 jurisdictions that I've referred to in the Caribbean, and including Venezuela. And they'll be present, IMF, UN, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, France, all these various other jurisdictions as have an involvement. And really, what actually happens is a critique of that report on the status of Dominica's anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism and countering the financing of proliferation report. And of course, we hope that the report will be favorable to this jurisdiction. As I said earlier, it's in all our interests. And Mr. Speaker, I really do hope that, you know, despite the challenges that we've had so far this morning, that I really do hope that we can recognize that we as a people, there are times when we have to come together, to work together for a collective good and a collective benefit. And there are other times when, of course, the political battle can take place. But we have to be able to understand what issues are national interest and issues which we all must rally around and work towards, and what issues are issues that we can squabble over. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly support the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to conclude this debate before this Honourable House. Firstly, let me just warn all members of this Honourable House. You must be very careful if people are very short. And I've learned that for the dexterity and the quickness, Mr. Speaker, and to say further that the Attorney General was also SSU trained like myself. Mr. Speaker, I haven't said this, Mr. Speaker. I haven't said this, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I think that if we're serious about fighting anti-money laundering issues, we must applaud this government for being transparent and responsible and support this matter, Mr. Speaker, before this Honourable House. But, Mr. Speaker, I intended to be very short, but I want to say something, especially to the young people who were born in the late 90s, because all they know is the Dominican Labour Party in office. But, Mr. Speaker, there's a history to the governance of this beautiful country that must be therefore put into context. Having said this, Mr. Speaker, we're just battling with the lingering moments of COVID-19. It has been said that COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, is the most devastating pandemic to hit this global space. I want to defer to say there's a next pandemic that is more destructive. And that pandemic has been conceptualized, researched, and developed by human beings. The pandemic of misinformation and disinformation by people, politicians who cannot win an election, Mr. Speaker. And that is very dangerous, Mr. Speaker. And there's no vaccine for that pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, having said so, Mr. Speaker, when I listened to the leader of the opposition who exited just now, one gets the impression that the Financial Action Task Force as the intergovernmental apparatus to establish and to formulate and to put policies in place, to place mandates on governments to fight money laundering and other predicate offenses, just, Mr. Speaker, emerged during the lifespan of the Dominican Labour Party. Having said so, Mr. Speaker, the Financial Action Task Force came into effect in July of 1989 at a G-Summit meeting in Paris, France, Mr. Speaker. From my research, I may be wrong, the Prime Minister was 17 years old. Yes. From my research, I may be wrong. Ian Douglas, the Honorable, was 19 years old? 18. Or 18, so to speak. All right. The Dominican Labour Party came into office in 2000. May the souls rest in peace, Honorable Mr. Douglas. In February of 1999, the CFATF, which is an instrument or an auxiliary from the regional standpoint of the Financial Action Task Force, came to Dominica to do its on-site investigation. By so doing, Mr. Speaker, a number of government officials were interviewed, namely the Minister for Finance, among others, the Chief of Police, the Head of Custom, etc. And the report was damning to Dominica's approach insofar as its failure to have the requisite infrastructure to fight money laundering. For matter of fact, the report said that there was a dichotomy of views expressed between the Minister of Finance then, government officials, and the police and other law enforcement agencies. What does that mean, therefore? When the ministers were asked, were there instances of money laundering in Dominica, they said 0 or nearly so. When the police and custom officials were interviewed, they said there were instances of money laundering. As a consequence, this small government was blacklisted, Mr. Speaker, because of the failure of the government then to put systems in place. I'm saying that to say that the 40 recommendation, it did not say it, plus 9, you have 9 more now. But the 40 recommendation from the Financial Action Task Force started in 1989, Mr. Speaker, not 2000 and beyond, Mr. Speaker. And it is this government first started with one of the prayer Charles, may so rest in peace, and I can speak with that with some absolute authority. Because there was no FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit. What we did then, the then Attorney General, Mr. David Bruni, and as the assistant to the Prime Minister, your humble servant, I was tasked to be the coordinator for the establishment of the FIU. We used the Barbados model, and St. Vincent did the same thing. Then subsequently thereafter, Mr. Reynolds, a police advisor, was sent to Dominica to look at our infrastructure, etc., etc. Then we had a consultant from Australia who came to Dominica for about 4 months. Then, in 2001, the Financial Intelligence Unit was formed under the Dominica Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. At that initial stage, we had 3 officers, Mr. Landa, the director, and the great Mr. Wati as the deputy director. Honorable Petra has passed on. Then Honorable Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit emerged, Mr. Speaker. And since then, we have done so much to improve our capacity in terms of the legal framework and the physical infrastructure. The AG made reference to that, Mr. Speaker. Then, not only have we had the FIU, but we have the supervisory authority established under Section 7 of the Money Laundering Prevention Act, which actually speaks to the financial unit as the authority. And under Section 15 of the said Act, establishes, Mr. Speaker, the advisory committee. And this amendment we spoke about seeks to broaden this committee, to bring in the Director of Public Prosecution to add a greater scope and higher level of competence. That is what we're doing. That is transparent, and the opposition needs to support this measure and stop speaking from both sides of the mouth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, having said that, the leader of the opposition made reference to 2013. But I can recall, in 2016, we came to this honorable House to amend the Proceeds of Crime Act. And under Section 61(1), which placed an obligation of people coming into Dominica to declare in excess of a certain amount of money. We went again, Mr. Speaker, in 2020, and they made the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank the authority to regulate domestic banks. This government has been very, 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 very responsive, Mr. Speaker. Very, very, very responsive. And I think it's a shame on the members of the opposition, knowing that that's your country, knowing that there's a team on Ireland doing on-site interviews, and you're trying to blacklist the country. So what is happening right now? We're getting kudos from international space, but you have members of the opposition trying their best to get Dominica blacklisted. That is not Dominican. That's not part of the Dominican's tradition, Mr. Speaker. And they ought to be ashamed of themselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I haven't said that. No, I know you have a beautiful suit. You have a beautiful suit. That's why you're so happy this morning. A beautiful suit. Okay? And you must pay attention to the rules of the House, Mr. Speaker, when you're dressing. I can do, okay, yeah. This suit is so much, that's why you're so happy this morning, this beautiful suit. Mr. Speaker, I haven't said that. But I'm not putting it on me, eh? I haven't said that, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I have the highest regard for the Financial Intelligence Unit, Mr. Speaker. For a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the last time I took a plane, just before COVID-19, I hope I should not listen to me. I had the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to go to St. Lucia at the Council of Ministers meeting, and I was pulled into a room by the head of the U.S. mission. And I was told that Dominica has the best FIU in the Eastern Caribbean. Mr. Speaker. The best. And at no time, when requests have been made to improve the human resource component, whenever I go to the Prime Minister, he even give ideas as to how we can augment the FIU, Mr. Speaker. That is the commitment of the Prime Minister and the Dominican Labour Party. We have nothing to hide. So do not come then speaking in tongues like we involve in money laundering. Having said that, I hope one of the orders that was tabled in this honorable House, I hope all of us are paying close attention to it. Because when you're trying to bring money under the disguise of humanitarian grounds, Mr. Speaker, that is precluded by virtue of this order. And strictly speaking, once there's a parent offense, even if the attempted offense is not spelled out in law, there's an attempt. So what transpired there, the saga just before your last election, was a clear case of attempted money laundering, Mr. Speaker. Yes. If we are interfering as the minister and the Prime Minister, I don't get involved in those things. That's the last thing I would do. A government who has been said to be, the Prime Minister is a dictator, and you're signing an MOU, yes, and for less, your signature, documentary, and real evidence, understand? And your operators are recorded, real evidence, and there's a buffer. There's no buffer. There's no buffer because you signed the MOU. So let us not get into that. There was an intended buffer, but that intended buffer was busted, yes, when the busted property was patented. When first, it's not me, see? That's what he said. Son, that burst. So, Mr. Speaker, having said that, of course, 110% confidence in OG. And then you come in this honorable House.
You cannot mention, do not call members of the public name in this honorable House. I've ruled on that. I have no tolerance for this. Nice. Nice. Great. Let's move.
That. Which is very uncommon for us from the West. We are very energetic and straightforward, to the point, no nonsense where we don't throw stones after people. Mr. Speaker, he made reference to a matter. One of the amendments he made some years ago allowed for cases of money laundering to be dealt with civilly before the magistrate court. So this money you're referring to has been forfeited, and as we speak, it is lying in the forfeiture account, Mr. Speaker. This is a responsible government. Now, I want to just give some credence to what I said just now when I referenced that the FIU is the best in the Eastern Caribbean catchment. Mr. Speaker, the FIU of Dominica has confiscated the most fund in the whole Eastern Caribbean, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, if you permit me, just to reference from 2017 to 2022, the Financial Intelligence Unit has successfully preferred 7 money laundering prevention charges against people, Mr. Speaker. 7. As we speak, 3 are real, and 1 is before the High Court by way of paper committal. Is this a government that is afraid, or the FIU is scared to pursue people? And to say that, Mr. Speaker, From 2017, for the same period that was referenced, there have been 35 civil cash forfeiture. 35, Mr. Speaker. We have to commend the FIU for the hard work, Mr. Speaker, and working in the custom. 35, Mr. Speaker. And in terms of the quantum, Mr. Speaker, of the cash that we're talking about in so far as forfeiture is concerned, you're talking about $7,510 that have been forfeited and placed into the government account, and has been used, Mr. Speaker, to do the following, among others. The Prime Minister just now made reference to the 5 scanners that was paid for over $2 million paid for by that fund. Vehicles for the police some years ago, the same. And it just continues and continues, Mr. Speaker. That is what the FIU is doing. That is what a responsible and transparent government is doing to fight money laundering offenses in this country, Mr. Speaker. So, I'm saying, and the Prime Minister, a former school teacher, was right. You don't come there and commit yourself. If you're not sure about something, you ask a question. But I find the young senator, John Finn, never, Mr. Speaker, never like asking questions. Very young. Okay? All right? Never likes to ask questions. She always comes like a Jep. You understand? Ready to fight and say what she wants. Jep, Jep, Jep. And when you come like a little fly and try something, she gets vexed. The Prime Minister is right. So I'm providing you now with the statistics. And to say that nothing is happening to fight money laundering crimes and other predicate offenses, Mr. Speaker, is very unfortunate. I see the head of the FIU here. I want to commend it, Mr. Speaker, and commend the staff for their tremendous service to country so far, Mr. Speaker. As I close, Mr. Speaker, going back to what is the real responsibility of a government insofar as its intent to fight money laundering and other attendant offenses. I made reference to and gave a historical perspective to how the FIU came about. But even after we did that, Mr. Speaker, we came in, this government came in, and the laws that we had on the books were deficient. One of those laws is the Procedural Crimes Act. We had Mr. Fitzroy Drayton from England who came down.
5 more minutes.
That's cool. And spent months in Dominica going through all our different pieces of legislation to help us to fight money laundering. And that is how we came out, Mr. Speaker, and amended the Procedural Crime Act to deal with predicate offenses, Mr. Speaker, among others. So this government has been working all the time, Mr. Speaker, to fight money laundering, and to say further, Mr. Speaker, and the AG is right, and the Prime Minister is right, because when the Financial Action Task Force started in July of 1989, it started to establish and promote policies to fight money laundering. And then, Mr. Speaker, in 2001, it expanded its mandate to deal with issues to combat terrorism, Mr. Speaker. And in 2012, it again expanded its mandate to deal with weapon of mass destruction and the proliferation of such, Mr. Speaker. So as the Prime Minister rightly said, it's a constant battle. So it's a dynamic process. And then we have to continue to do what we have to do to look at our legal regime and to support our legal regime with the requisite infrastructure to help us to fight money laundering and the other offenses that you just referenced, Mr. Speaker. But having said so, Mr. Speaker, we should be applauded for acting in mitigation. And as the AG rightly said, our review in May 2023 may say that we have to do more, but we are confident that we continue to demonstrate our intent to do everything possible to put the brakes on people who want to commit money laundering and other predicate offenses, Mr. Speaker. I commend this matter to be for some of those.
This concludes the debate. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled the Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2022 be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time. The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. Committee stage without amendment. The question is that the report of the committee and the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Yeah, read it over. The mic was off. It's good. Put it on. Make it get green. Okay, stop. Good. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2022 be read a third time and passed.
Seconded.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled the Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2022 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2022.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this amendment is closely linked to the amendment of the other two acts that have been debated thus far. Financial of terrorism and combating financial proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Mr. Speaker, is a serious matter. Huh? Huh? Hmm? Yeah, that's it. That's it, yeah. I don't make mistakes, I don't know. Yeah, that's it. Let me start it over. That's it. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, this matter is closely linked to money laundering and the countering financing of terrorism and combating financial proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. As indicated before, this government, Mr. Speaker, is intent on taking a collaborative and holistic approach to combating financial crimes in this country. Dominica has also pledged to undertake the needed amendments to its legislation, systems, and processes to ensure compliance with the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations. And the punishment of fraudulent activities goes a long way in curbing on financial behavior, but must be, Mr. Speaker, undertaken in conjunction with ensuring that persons cannot profit from the proceeds of certain crimes. The Proceeds of Crime, Mr. Speaker, Amendment Bills comprises 10 clauses and seek to provide additional definitions, strengthen the Joint Anti-Money Laundering Advisory Committee, and to improve clarity and effectiveness of Dominica's anti-money laundering, countering financing of terrorism, and combating financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction legislative framework. Clause 1 and 2, Mr. Speaker, set out the short title and interpretation provision of the bill respectively. Clause 3 of the bill inserts 5 new definitions, including bank, proliferation, security, regulatory commissions, and supervisory authority. Section 1 sets out the short title, an interpretation provision of the bill. Clause 3 of the bill inserts 5 new definitions, including bank, proliferation, security, and regulatory commissions, and supervisory authority. Section 41 of the Parent Act, Mr. Speaker, is amended by Clause 4 by inserting a new subsection 5A. This new clause provides for and clarifies the type and form of information required to be produced under an order of the court. In particular, Mr. Speaker, the amendment provides for information contained by means of a computer, and it has to be produced in a visible and legible form. This amendment is needed since the courts have already ruled that law enforcement require access to information held in electronic devices such as computer, cell phones, among others. Clause 7 amends Section 59 of the Act to expressly empower the Attorney General to apply for caveat in relation to an application for property seizing or interim freezing order for the registrar to order entry of a caveat where it is appropriate. This addition, Mr. Speaker, further strengthens the Proceeds of Crime Act by ensuring that people who obtain property, including real property, by engaging in unlawful conduct or property that has been used in or in connection with or is intended to use in or in connection with unlawful conduct can be encumbered and ultimately forfeited to the state at the end of the proceedings. Mr. Speaker, it was discovered that there was a need to expand the supervisory regime under the legislation, and this is what Clause 8 seeks to do. Clause 8, Mr. Speaker, amends Section 60 of the Act, which deals with the issuing of a code of practice. This clause expands the Anti-Money Laundering Act and the supervisory regime to include the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and the Eastern Caribbean Security Regulatory Commission as the supervisory authorities. And this authority is provided with the responsibility for ensuring that the regulated entities comply with the legislative obligation under the anti-money laundering regime and provides direction on the imposition and disposal of administrative penalties. An administrative penalty collected by the advisory authority shall be paid into the asset forfeiture fund in the case of the unit, that is the financial services unit. In the case of the central bank, confiscated funds shall be retained for the use of the central bank for the purposes of its function, and in the case of the Security Regulatory Commission, be retained for the use by the Commission for the purposes of its functions. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the Financial Services Unit is the supervisory authority for the financial institutions and scheduled entities other than commercial banks. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is the supervisory authority for the commercial bank, and the Eastern Caribbean Security Regulatory Commission is a regulator of the security exchanges. Mr. Speaker, this amendment also seeks to broaden the scope of the responsibilities of some of the key agencies involved in this fight. Clause 9 amends Section 60A of the Act to add financing of proliferation to the scope of responsibility of the Joint Anti-Money Laundering Advisory Committee, along with the money laundering and terrorist financial activities. The committee, by 2 new subsections inserted by Clause 9 of this amendment, will also have the responsibility of advising the Minister on the development of national policies to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, the financing of proliferation, and coordinating actions to assess the national money laundering, terrorist financing, and financing proliferation risk. Clause 10 repeals Section 60B of the Act. This is needed, Mr. Speaker, to remove the unnecessary, confusing existence of the same offense in 2 different pieces of legislation and differing penalties for the same offense. The repeal of Section 60B, therefore, Mr. Speaker, removes this duplication and clearly identifies and confines the offense of money laundering to that under the Money Laundering Prevention Act of Chapter 7303. Mr. Speaker, with this brief introduction, I commend this bill before this honorable House.
The bill is before the House for debate. Yes, Honorable Luge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's 3 pieces of legislation we are here to debate: the Money Laundering Prevention Amendment, the Proceeds of Crime Amendment, and the Suppression of Financing of Terrorism Amendment. If, on an average, we come to this honorable House 3 times per year, we will always be behind in enacting these amendments. And that's one of the big problems we have. If you compare the sittings of the House in Dominica to other Caribbean countries, other jurisdictions, they meet on an average 10 to 15 times per year. But when we meet on an average 3 times per year, I can understand why today we're meeting in emergency session. Mr. Speaker, the Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act, Chapter 1229, is my view that it's a noble cause to come to this Parliament to make these amendments, and that is why each one who's risen on the opposition side has already said that they support the amendments. But because we support the amendments doesn't mean we should just sit down. That's not our role. There are certain concerns that we have, we must raise. So, in a democracy, I think we have to have the decency to listen to the parliamentary opposition, even if we don't like what they're saying or not. We're raising genuine concerns, and these concerns must be heard. Most importantly, in Dominica, Mr. Speaker, what citizens want to know is that when we come to this House to enact legislation or to amend legislation, that the whole question of implementation of these laws is applied. We have various arms of government. We have the executive, we have the judiciary, and under the judiciary you have the DPP, you have the Attorney General, you have the Magistrate and High Court. But are these institutions functioning properly? And are we moving to prosecute serious crimes? It cannot be, Mr. Speaker, that under existing laws, that a police chief, if say, for example, that he has video evidence of individuals offloading, quote unquote, a suitcase of money at the home of an individual, any citizens of Dominica. And that case just goes cold. You know, why is that case going cold? And when the police chief refuses to prosecute serious crime, what are the options open to those affected by such crimes? If there's not leadership, Mr. Speaker, and the will, the moral authority to prosecute crime, we will have the best laws. We'll come to this parliament, we'll have the best laws, we'll amend them time after time. But when you do the reality check, there will be very few prosecution, few hearings, evidence locked up in a bank or room for years, or evidence, in some cases, disappearing. If, for example, you has $500,000, a seizure of cash, you know, you pick it up and then it also goes cold. If you have suspects and hard evidence sitting in a vault, you know, you don't have that case moving in the courts. So when I speak of the will to prosecute serious crimes, when I speak of the moral authority to take action, when I speak of leadership ensuring that perpetrators of these crimes, whether blue, whether green, whether red, we must know that these people must be sent to jail and face fine and confine. Not just sent to jail, the fines must be real. This must be the end product of such legislation, not just to place in a library or in a museum. People must face long jail sentences and heavy fines. And even politicians, Mr. Speaker, like you and me, well, not you, but when we are caught with our fingers in the cookie jar, the financial cookie jar that is, Mr. Speaker, when deep pockets and proceeds of crime are paraded for the world to see, when we flash multiple mansions, import expensive SUVs, and even brand new pleasure boats with 4 engines sticking out at the rear, we have a problem.
Speaker, a point of order.
Yes, he's standing on a point of order, sir.
Take a seat, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what's the relevance of that to the substantive issue before the Honorable House?
Yes.
Apart from imputing improper motive.
Well, I would more go on the line of relevance because we deliver a bill. So I agree you need to point out what's the relevance, otherwise get straight to the point,
Okay.
to the bill itself.
Okay. The parent legislation, Mr. Speaker, Chapter 12, 29, 59E, where property obtained through unlawful conduct or tainted property or has been recoverable property, property which represents the original property, also recoverable property. Section 59E2, where a person enters into a transaction by which he, A, disposes of recoverable property, whether the original property or property which by virtue of this part represents the original property, and B, obtains other property in place of it. Now, 59E, 59F1, where the recoverable property of a person is mixed with other property, whether the property is his property or property of another, the portion of the mixed property which is attributable to recoverable property represents the property obtained through unlawful conduct or the tainted property, as the case may be. Now, you asked relatives, so I went to the parent legislation to show the relevance of where I'm going. Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, when you have proceeds of crime that cannot be explained by our legal income, we as politicians, If our police chief, the DPP, the Attorney General sees such crimes, if we are blindfolded or willfully blind and fail to act, then today's rush to Parliament in emergency session in an attempt to satisfy an international organization or an international obligation, none of this will result in any prosecution. If we sit, Mr. Speaker, on these laws after enacting, as we have with white-collar criminals, money launderers, and even politicians will be laughing all the way to the bank, or even hide their illicit proceeds of crime in the building of multiple homes, 4-story buildings, mansions, luxury SUVs, and even pleasure yachts. Almost finished, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, how do we resolve the issue of the will to take these laws and intent of these laws to their logical conclusion? Will we have the fortitude to enable our institutions to really function? Or will we continue to only have a semblance or a mirage of crime fighting? Thank you very much.
Hold on 1 second. Honorable Luge, your mic is on.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be very brief. I just want to place on record my support for this amendment bill, Proceeds of Crime Amendment Bill 2022. As with the other legislation that's before the House today, it is seeking to strengthen the tools in the arsenal of the jurisdiction to protect against money laundering insofar as that is possible. And Mr. Speaker, it is noticeable that Clause 4, the amendment to Section 41 of the Parent Act, strengthens the arm of the court and the prosecution or the investigatory authorities in terms of the requirement for production orders to include or make express provision for material and information in digital and other forms to be made available to the investigators in a visible and legible form. That is particularly important in the current developmental stage that we are, and that's a laudable addition to the arsenal of the investigatory authorities. Also, Mr. Speaker, Clause 7, the provision whereby the Attorney General will be able, expressly provision is made for the Attorney General to be able to apply for a caveat in respect to property which may have been this may be the subject of an order. That, Mr. Speaker, is significant because, of course, if there is not a caveat in place or some other protective measure, then the relevant property may well be dissipated and disappear and not be available to be substantively seized by way of order of the court. Mr. Speaker, clearly the additional Clause 9, the amendment to Section 60A, which provides at paragraph D for 2 new subsections to be inserted. One providing for advice to the Minister on the development of national policies to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, and the financing of proliferation, and a new subparagraph F providing for coordination of actions to assess the national money laundering, terrorist financing, and financing of proliferation risks. Those are significant additions to the authority of the anti-money laundering Advisory Committee, referred to as the NAMLAC, which is the body that was referred to previously, and is the body responsible for advising in respect to the jurisdictions, policies, and processes in that regard. So, Mr. Speaker, this is another piece of legislation, another piece of the jigsaw intended to strengthen Dominica's anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism, and the countering of proliferation legislative regime, and I have no hesitation in commending it to this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the amendment to this piece of legislation, and the others follow as well. And I sat there this morning, and it's like we've been specially targeted to, you shouldn't debate, you should debate. You should stand up and say, yes, I agree, no, I don't agree, and sit down and shut up. Because this is what I'm getting. Because every time we stand here and we have a discussion and we have a debate, which is a debate, we are told that you all don't know what you're talking about. You don't get people to prepare your speeches for you. You all just come and read. You know, you all have the country blacklisted. And because the Financial Action Task Force is here, you all want to say things so they can have Dominicans on a wrong footing. Mr. Speaker, we all are Dominicans, and we are all patriotic Dominicans, and we want all what is good for Dominica. When we come to this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, we stand up and we agree or we disagree, and we have the right to do so because it's supposed to be a democratic country. And this House is supposed to be a house where we can speak out and say what we feel. But to me, we sit here and everybody hit us. It's like, y'all are no good. Y'all say what you want. Y'all come here and y'all don't have any, we have Dominica. We've been working for Dominica for over 30, 40 years. And we've done all we could to help this country to move on. So how are we now not wanting good for Dominica? You all had those things. It's supposed to be a long time ago to come to the House, but we come to the House 3 times a week, a year, Mr. Speaker. And when I got the information, emergency meeting, I said, oh, something going down, because we're not here too often. So I said, what is so pressing? What is so critical? What is so crucial? Did something big happen that the present legislation we have cannot deal with it, so we have to come to amend quickly? Albeit, Mr. Speaker, we sit here, and we are very happy about it. This side of the House is extremely happy because we want to ensure that all is done to stop these crimes happening in our country so people are safe, our business community is safe, and our communities remain safe. And those persons who work legitimately in this country can also be on a safe footing because you work hard legitimately in this country for whatever salary, but somebody, a perpetrator, will come here and have some proceeds of crime that they have billions and millions of dollars at their disposal. While you sit there and you look at them and you're working hard for this country. So we're in agreement. So I don't know what the big story is about lashing us out and criticizing us and looking at us as if we are nothing. We are part of this House. And it is time that we get the respect from the government side. We come here, we have the same mind. We should be of the same mind. You know? So, Mr. Speaker, it requires more stringent measures. So we're making more stringent measures available, which we agree to, Mr. Speaker. But was it needs must? Were we coerced into doing it? Were we pressed, pressured, compelled? I don't care whichever word we want to use that caused us to be here today, but I'm happy because we are getting work done. But, Mr. Speaker, I hope and pray that the legislation like we have before, we have plenty of papers lying on tables, in drawers, in wherever. The important thing is the enforcement of this legislation. And not just for some people, you know, Mr. Speaker, not just for some people, but for everybody. It does not matter. Anybody who has committed the crime, it doesn't matter, irrespective of where you work, irrespective of who you are, let the law work. And Mr. Speaker, the authorities must be allowed to do their work without interference. We have to allow the law to work. And Mr. Speaker, we don't want instances where something happened and somebody called the chief of police or somebody may call any other of the authorities and tell them, I want you to drop that case. We want to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that
you are imputing improper motive there.
That is with improper motive?
Yes, yes. Yes. So I would like you to withdraw this.
Withdraw what, Mr. Speaker?
You know what you were talking about in terms of calling the chief of police.
So we want to assure that the law pertains to everybody, not just some people, and that no impediment.
Honorable Senator, unless you know that somebody like you called the commission and he dropped something, you cannot say that.
Mr. Speaker, I'm asking a question now.
No, it cannot be a question. So withdraw it. You're imputing improper motive on the state.
All you know, all the law, but all you never know if one will stand up to talk. But for us, the law works for us. Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the statement.
Okay, proceed.
Because every time we stand here, we always have problems, because every time, we're not just imputing improper motives, you know. Alleged imputing improper motives now, because you even tell us that we're imputing improper motives before we say it. Because it's like, oh, you have the Holy Spirit, and you can tell us what we're going to say and what we're not going to say. Because you're a psychic inside here for us only.
Remember, we're not in a back and forth field.
Mr. Speaker,
where you're responding to the chair.
Whatever.
I'd remind you that the Honorable Minister of National Security called on them in this Honorable House. I asked him to withdraw. He withdrew immediately.
So what is that?
So why the opposition cannot just withdraw?
So what?
Not to debate with the chair. Just withdraw and move on.
I withdraw the statement, you know. You go ahead with it. Just withdraw. Mr. Speaker, we welcome laws that strengthen and prevent. I don't know what is happening to all about all you and learn today there. Laws that strengthen and prevent the use of such measures. We are very fortunate in Mr. Speaker. In Dominica, we do not have organized crime syndicates. We hope not. We should also be aware that those who reap the profits from crimes are not always the ones who are arrested and held to account by the courts. Mr. Speaker, we should also be aware that those who reap the profits from crime are not always the ones who are arrested and held to account by the courts. Mr. Speaker, I would really be happy if the members of the other side would agree with us, because what we're saying there is truth, and we are agreeing with you that we amend the legislation to help curb all the things that you're saying that you want to curb. So we are agreeing with you. Mr. Speaker, we hope that this legislation, it will reduce the impact of crimes in Dominica by giving the authorities the powers to deal with any issues of crime, proceeds of crime. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation that we are sitting in this house, called an urgent meeting, emergency meeting, 12 o'clock in the night, some of us get our stuff, 11 o'clock in the night, that we are here now for a good purpose. And I was happy when I received the letter from Mr. Speaker, all of us, that the Parliament is open on Sunday and Saturday for us to come and do research. I said, wow, I was taken aback. And I said, I hope this will pertain to other parliaments when we have it, that when we come to debate the budget and we have supplementary appropriation, that is open as well for us to do our research so they can ensure that the cameras can show us that we are the ones who are ensuring that we do our own debate ourselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator, your mic.
Mr. Speaker, I rise. Make a short contribution to the debate on the proceeds of crime, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I sat attentively listening to the debate, Mr. Speaker. And I listened to the member for the Roseau North constituency speaking about politicians, Mr. Speaker. And I hope he has included in that sect of politicians, Mr. Speaker, in that subset, thank you very much, mathematician, Senator Esprit. I hope he has in that subset of politicians who sign memorandum of understanding on the promise, Mr. Speaker, of diplomatic appointments, Mr. Speaker, for campaign financing funds, Mr. Speaker. I hope he has that in his subset. Mr. Speaker, I hope he has in his subset, Mr. Speaker, on the proceeds of crime. Businesses in Dominica, Mr. Speaker, where checks were signed into the accounts of those businesses, Mr. Speaker, for further transmission onto political parties for campaign purposes. And the police should have arrested, Mr. Speaker, those businesses, Mr. Speaker. We have, Mr. Speaker, witnesses who told us, Mr. Speaker, that checks were made out to businesses associated with political parties, Mr. Speaker, to launder those monies into those businesses. A political party, thank you very much, a political party in Dominica for those funds to eventually find themselves. And, Mr. Speaker, politicians who went to Switzerland to have discussions, Mr. Speaker, with quote-unquote investors, some of whom have been found guilty and are in jail, Mr. Speaker, at this point in time, have been sentenced to jail. And nobody has been arrested for that, Mr. Speaker. Those persons should be put into the mix that the member for Roseau North is speaking about. Mr. Speaker, and the member for Roseau North is speaking about in our attempt to satisfy international organizations or international obligations. We make no bones about it, Mr. Speaker. We are part of a global community, Mr. Speaker. And yes, we have obligations to meet. We have obligations from the international community because we are part of the global family and we respect our obligations and we adhere to our obligations, Mr. Speaker. That is what a law-abiding government and citizenry does, Mr. Speaker. We conform to international rules and regulations, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, to say that what you speak in, Mr. Speaker, when you come to this house, and that is what I want the young senator to understand, young Senator Joseph, that when you come to this house, Mr. Speaker, you must speak the truth. And that is why it's not that we do not want you to speak. We have no problem with the opposition. We spent 20 years in opposition, Mr. Speaker. That is why we know what the rules of the House are, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we want all parliamentarians, even those on the opposition, to conform to the rules. And that is what you have been trying to implement, Mr. Speaker. So we're not trying to prevent anybody from speaking, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with Senator Joseph that those who have reaped the profits of crime, Mr. Speaker, they must be arrested, no matter what side of the fence that they find themselves on, Mr. Speaker. Those who are enjoying the profits of criminal activity in the country, Mr. Speaker, they must be brought in by the police and arrested. With these few words, Mr. Speaker, I want to lend my support to the proceeds of crime bill before this honorable.
I see the Honorable Minister yield to you, Opposition Leader. So good. I see nice camaraderie there. So yes, Honorable Linton.
Mr. Speaker, it is difficult to process what I just heard, and what you allowed. Because this morning, we couldn't say a word about money laundering. We couldn't say a word about proceeds of crime, where we knew that individuals were in jail somewhere else for proceeds of crime. But individuals that were connected to Dominica, we knew that. The Prime Minister recited it. It was okay for him to do, it was not okay for me to do.
It wasn't okay for him
and
to
now,
do. Leader of opposition, let me just comment on this. Because I think you're trying to give the public the wrong impression. You mention it, so you reference it. And that is why I'm saying, let us not go down a slippery road where members, instead they debate on substantive matter, members have to come and correct what other members saying. And when I was in the Summit of the America, the sideline, where you had presiding officers, the chairman of the House, I presented them. And one of my main takeaway point was, politicians are politicians' own enemy. And I presented on the issue of corruption. And I had to go to Canada to present again because they like what I said. But no, it was for the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And my argument is, when you have your country, you have, and I said it in the House when I was in opposition, you have to be a statesman. When you're in a political platform, it's gladiator business. But when you're in this honorable House, you have to be careful. Because you see, you have immunity. That is my point. Honorable Luge spoke. I did not interject. Because he navigated the best he could. Senator Francis Joseph spoke. I did not stop her except on one occasion to withdraw because I think she was put in improper motive. Stop giving me wrong impression because we will bring down our country in the process. And I'm not just pointing out just you, all members. So I'm saying, as the chair, I will not tolerate any member calling people's name in the House if they are not there to defend themselves, especially if I don't know what happened in Iran. How would I live with my conscience? So finally, if something happened in America with somebody, are we going to, in a court, we're going to bring it in the House when it's not the substantial debate matter? Stop doing this. I'm trying my best over and over. Last thing I would say in regards to what you pointed out, Honorable Douglas, he never called names. Never called names, but he made his point. Who the cap fit, let them wear it. But you cannot be calling people name in this honorable House and the person is not there to defend themselves. How many times do I have to say that? So moving forward, when members call names, unless it is on congratulating somebody, I'm going to ask you to take your seat and your debate ends. Simple. Because I try to explain, and what you are trying to do is imputing improper motive on me in the House and in the public. Something happened in the public, I will deal with that matter separately on the radio station or somewhere they have it on Facebook. We will deal with that separately. But what we don't want to happen is where we're supposed to be building camaraderie, members of the House taking each other to court. That's what we don't want to happen. When we're supposed to be comrades, working in the interests of Dominica, we have to be taking each other to court. You don't want that to happen, but I'm going to deal with that matter separately out of the House. This has to stop. As the judge of the House, I'm saying, do not call people's name in the House unless you're trying to congratulate them with something positive. Period. No exception to no member. You read the book. Yeah, the standing order. Read it. Let's proceed, and you see this rudeness there. What rule you... I'm not going to tolerate those things, you know. Member, please proceed, and I'm clear on this matter. Very clear now. Yes. Honorable Leader of Opposition, proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my absolute support to the proposed amendment before the House, which is an amendment to the Procedural Crime Act. And to say, first of all, before I give my points on the substantive nature of this bill, nothing in this Parliament you have immunity from prosecution based on what you say in the House. But the drafters of the Constitution and the standing orders also put systems in place to protect those who do not have the ability to respond. Now, when members stand in this House and accuse members of the public, whether they hold a public function or not, of a criminal activity, when we say that people call the chief of police and cause him to discontinue prosecutions or investigations, and that he goes ahead and does that, we are saying that the chief of police and he who or she who may have called the chief of police are involved in criminal activity. And that is not right. And this cannot be tolerated in the House. Mr. Speaker, I have been the Prime Minister of this country for some time now. I have had the privilege of working with 3 substantive holders of the post of Chief of Police of Dominica, and about 5 in the acting capacities. I can say without any fear of contradiction from any one of those people that I have never in my lifetime as Prime Minister called any one of them to either ask them to charge somebody or don't charge anybody. I don't get involved in those things. We have had numerous director of public prosecutions, local and one foreign. They can never tell you that Roosevelt Square as Prime Minister has ever called them on any prosecution that they're involved in. The head of FIU can tell you that I have never, and we can speak to the gentleman who was before the current one. Never get involved in those things. To get involved in prosecution. If any of my supporters were to get involved in any criminal activity as the leader of the party, I will help you with a lawyer. Why don't we call the police for you? No. And so when people come here and try to impute improper motives and also innuendos and making political statements, they know why they're doing it. They know why they're doing it. They're doing it for political end, for mischief making. And so the chief of police is not there to defend himself. He can't defend himself. And why seek to malign the character of these individuals when they have no opportunity to defend themselves? They can't take me to court. To say, take me to court. They can't take me to court. I can stand and defend myself. But those who do not sit in there do not have the luxury of doing that. And so the drafters of the Constitution and the standing orders put systems in place to protect people like this. This is why we can't call the president's name, whether good or bad. Because the president is above the law, he is immune. Insofar as he's the president of the country. And we can't bring the office of the president in disrepute at any time, in any way. And so, Mr. Speaker, when people come here and impute proper motives and procedural crime and who has what and so on, they must, when they go home, as they're going now, watch in the mirror, go to their files and see what they have been engaged in, the criminal activities that they've been engaged in. Signed documents, evidence of wanting to sell state assets with no authority, contrary to law. And if one of these persons that you wanted to sell this passport to is in jail in the Philippines for drug trafficking and money laundering, and you come in here and as if, well, you are Pontius Pilate, look at yourselves. None of us here is the Philip Enid. We are here bringing this to Parliament because this is in the interest of the country. And instead of speaking on the substance of the matter, this United Party is rotten at the core. It's a dangerous institution to this country. Only thing that they promote in this country is the country's destruction, the black iron of Dominica. Never putting forward a good idea, a suggestion on how we can make life better for the people of this country. Never. A complete difference, night and day, between when Labour Party was in opposition to these guys being in opposition today. When Rosie went out there as leader of government, we went to Parliament, we went to London and got parliamentarians to ask questions on Dominica's behalf, fighting for survival as leader of the opposition. Scholarships, building roads, preschools and teaching children how to read and write, and senior citizens how to read and write. That is the legacy of the Labour Party in opposition. What's your legacy? And you come here talking about your dashing lift. Of course you're dashing lift because you can't consume anything. You cannot absorb intelligence. You cannot absorb facts. Of course you're dashing lift. And so it's something so simple. We should not have been here until lunch or after lunch. Simple. Yeah. Let's go. Let's proceed. And they have not spoken because I have to respond to what you have said. We should never allow, wait, my brother, I allow you to speak, you know. I allow you to speak. I allow you to speak. And I am responding, pleasure crap, my brother. I own no boats in Dominica or anywhere else in the world. I wish I had one. I wish I had one. And even if I had one, because you're referencing me, yes, of course I know you're referencing me. But you guys, that's a problem. A problem, you sit there with no motivation. No, huh? My brother, I am responding to what you've said and what your colleagues have said, because we should never allow you guys to come to the parliament with political statements and not responding to you. Lazy people. No kind of interest in this country. And that's the government going to have, that the member of Salisbury with Minister of Finance and Minister of Foreign Affairs. And so, Mr.
You, that's obvious.
Mr. Speaker, if you go to the back of the bill, the objects and reasons are very clear, straightforward, very basic. And I said in my previous contribution on the previous amendment that this is administrative in nature. Administrative in nature. But we must never, and I agree, you see, the House, we gave the impression that the problem was Alex Boyd Knights. But nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. You see, member. No, but can I respond to you? Can I respond to you?
You can respond because as we respond.
Member for Rosenhoff, when you say something, you're allowed to say it. We have, and in that case, I have a responsibility and a duty to respond to you. Had you focused on the amendments, I would have been focused on the amendments, but I am taking some time to set the record straight where you're concerned and where Senator Joseph is concerned. When Senator Joseph comes and says about the chief police and people calling the chief police and influencing charges and prosecution, we have to stand and dispel this. Huh? No, I didn't prevent you speaking. No, ma'am, no, you spoke. You spoke. I am now speaking. We allow you to speak.
One is right on that one.
But if you had working, why you answer me for? You had working, okay, you had working.
It's right.
You're hardworking.
That's why I did not rule on it, because I figure it is a members. So,
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the main, Mr. Speaker, yeah, Mr. Speaker, the main object and reason. You see, anyway, Mr. Speaker, the main thing there, this is what the object and reasons are. The bill comprises 10 clauses, that is to say the amendment bill, and seeks to provide additional definitions. Additional definitions. So for example, in the previous bill, prior to us recently we passed the virtual assets bill. So reference now has to be made in amendments to this bill. And a simple thing. And so it goes on to say, to strengthen the joint anti-money laundering advisory committee, to give it more power and more authority to act, and to act more decisively. So there's not to come back and forth. It gives it the authority to move in certain things that it sees that are necessary to action.
But
That's it. We see you haven't read it. That's it. Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of the public, we're here doing the public business. The member of the office saying, I'm reading from the wrong bill. But he hasn't read it. You see? Anyway. Right? Improve the clarity, efficiency, and effectiveness of Dominica's anti-money laundering, countering, financing of terrorism, and financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And even if we don't have weapons of mass destruction in Dominica, we're here. Because our responsibility is not only to ourselves, as I said, it is to the whole world. We've had no acts of international terrorism in Dominica. We've had some acts of domestic terrorism, domestic terrorism, but no acts of international terrorism directed at foreign entities, foreign countries, or foreign governments. But we have come here and passed legislation because a child in New York is as important as a child in Vegas, Mr. Speaker. That's how we see ourselves as a government, a responsible government, a country that's part of the United Nations, part of the global architecture. But these people, there are some people who only see themselves as being in a little street in goodwill. Selling bananas, $5, $5 for $5, Mr. Speaker, that's only see themselves. During after hurricane. Parochial. So these are simple. Let's roll to the next one. And let's go and do other things that are important to the people of Dominica. So, Mr. Speaker, in my efforts to speak really to a very simple amendment and seeking and my intervention, Mr. Speaker, is to reinforce the rules of the House, because I don't think it's fair to you as a chair for people to think that you are interpreting the rules wrongly, unfairly. You're right in your interpretation of the rules. And so while we're immune from prosecution or anybody taking us to court for what we say in this House, the police can't come and arrest anybody inside there, except when the Speaker calls you and tells you to go out. The police can come arrest any one of us inside here. We're protected. And what we say is we also protect by what we say. And therefore we have to be responsible with what we say. When the Constitution gives you the rules, give you such great privilege, it comes with an even increased level of responsibility. And we can't come and make political statements and injure people's character. It's not right. It's not fair. Because the reality is, when we try to do this to people, we don't like it to be done to us. And it's not fair to the people who are working so diligently. The folks in the FIU have been attacked many times. Many times. And instead we applaud what they're doing, we come here and besmirching them. Besmirching them. I don't speak to any judge. The only time I talk to a judge is when they tell me the housing is inadequate. That's all. That's the only time I talk to a judge. That's the only time. I don't call these people and talk to them about their functions or direct their work. We in this party have been subjected to many litigations, and we get the best lawyers to defend us. That's all we do. And we have been victorious, thank God. All the time. But we don't go influencing the court's decisions. No. So I'm not sure if that was happening. I'm not sure the way the guys speak as if, well, I don't know if that was happening between 1995 and 2000. I don't know. But insofar, we've been here from 2000, and I mean, I've been around. This doesn't happen, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think it is fair to give that impression. We can banter politically. Let us banter politically. You can say something about me, I can defend myself. There's nothing anybody can say about me, I can't stand on my feet and defend myself. I don't need anybody to defend me. I never ask anybody to defend me. But do not come here and attack citizens of this country who have given all their life service to this country, and use the parliament to do that. It's not right. And I think every single Dominican should condemn the actions of the opposition in besmirching the character, the professionalism of our people. They're not perfect. They're not perfect. But we should never, and to say that they're involved in criminal activities. That's not right. Or suggest that they're involved in this thing. What might make up stories now? Oh. But the senator said that people call it your police to discontinue thing.
Relax yourself.
Huh? Of course. Yes. Yeah. Have you called it your police? Have you called it your police? But that's what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is. You see, these people are calculatively dangerous, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to close this debate on this very simple matter, as you heard from the Prime Minister and Honorable Douglas, except to say, Mr. Speaker, having an appreciation for the rule of law cannot be seen in different ways. And in the opposition, you have members of the opposition who constantly, every Wednesdays, offend the Public Order Act. And they come to the House and talking about respect for the law. Section 3 of the Public Order Act, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, stick to the Procedure of Crime Act, please. Yeah, but let's just proceed on the thing.
Speaker, this bill has to be placed in the proper context. And I also want to applaud the effort of the lawyers working in the state, the Aegis chambers, because it's working in concert along with the members of the FIU. You find a teamwork exercise is being done to pursue people who violate our laws under the various pieces of legislation we brought before this Honorable House. Thus referring to the Honorable Member for Rosa North, when he challenged the Honorable Prime Minister as to the relevance of as to what the Prime Minister was saying, to say that the three measures that have been brought before this Honorable House this morning are all interconnected. So we have to understand the mechanics as to how all those pieces of legislation work. So it's difficult to appreciate and understand the Money Laundering Prevention Act as to how it is applied without the support from the Procedural Crimes Act. Because sometimes, Mr. Speaker, they work most times in close connection. Reference was made as to one who get the impression, listening from outside, that the Proceed of Crime Act is simply on the books and not being utilized. That's not true, Mr. Speaker, and it's a blatant misunderstanding as to how the relevant pieces of legislation work. Just say, Mr. Speaker, that the Proceeds of Crime Act has been used 56 times thus far. Now, most times, if you're investigating a money laundering issue, you have to make what you call a production order so that information relevant to a particular case can be obtained from a financial institution. You understand what I'm saying? And that's where the Proceeds of Crime Act, insofar as the mechanics are concerned, comes into effect. So that is why we have to understand the pieces of legislation that are brought before this honorable House before you stand up and speak as if to say you're an authority, but you're no authority. You only have one authority, and the authority to actually propagate misinformation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to qualify what I've just said, that, and to just to break down and to disaggregate the 56 production orders that I made reference to just now. So far, Mr. Speaker, we have had 14 forfeiture orders. 14. 12 freeze orders. 12. 13 production orders, Mr. Speaker, have been made, and in terms of one, Mr. Speaker, for property recovery. I don't want to go into details as to the name of the person, but so far, there have been one property recovery order application made, Mr. Speaker. So we have been able, Mr. Speaker, to utilize this Proceeds of Crime Act several times. So the 14 production orders I just made reference to had to do what the FIU, working with the attorneys in the chambers, have applied to a financial institution to obtain information that is relevant to a money laundering investigation. And that is how this act works, in conjunction with the Money Laundering and Prevention Act. And of course, the same can be said for people who want to actually facilitate, by any means, terrorist financing, etc. And of course, we may have to ask the question as to whether there were any proceeds from the visit to the Polisario. That is something that we have to ask a very astute question about, and whether the funds were disclosed, if at all funds were actually received and for the purpose for which those funds were received. So, Mr. Speaker, with that brief intervention, I close this debate on the substantive issue before this honorable House, Mr. Speaker.
This concludes the debate. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time.
Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. And I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022 passed the committee stage without amendment. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Honorable Minister, yes.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Prevention Act of 2022 be read a third time and pass.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2022.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Of the bill shortly entitled Suppression of Financial Terrorism Amendment Act of 2022.
Seconded,
Mr. Speaker, the Suppression of Financing of Terrorism Bill has 23 clauses and seeks to expand the original act by providing additional definitions, the provisions of Sanctions Committee, and to strengthen the overall effectiveness of Dominica's counter-terrorism financing and United Nations Security Council resolutions compliance regime. Mr. Speaker, by Clause 3, the amendment seeks to add 11 new definitions to the scope of the Act and to cover a number of concepts which are largely due to amendments in relation to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank Security Regulatory Commission and the United Nations Security Council resolutions. A definition for terrorist entity, which means the person who is owned or controlled by a terrorist or terrorist group, as well as a banking business, among others, are included in this clause. Clause 4 amends subsection 4.3 of the Act to expressly criminalize the financing of travel to a state or other than the individual states of residence or nationality for the purpose of perpetrating, planning, or the preparation of or participation in terrorist acts or providing for or receiving of terrorist training. Clause 5, Mr. Speaker, amends section 5, subsection 1, by increasing the financial penalties to be imposed for an offense under section 4. Anyone guilty of perpetrating any act involving the financing of terrorism can be punished as follows. In case of an individual, the penalty has been altered from a fine of $200,000 or imprisonment for a term of 25 years or both to a fine of $500,000 or imprisonment for a term of 25 years or both. In the case of an entity, the penalty has been increased from $1 million to $2 million. Clause 6 amends section 7, which deals with the liability of financial institutions to include the scheduled businesses as defined in section 2 of the Money Laundering Prevention Act. Mr. Speaker, this amendment seeks to establish or to have the Attorney General as the competent authority for proposing designation of persons, group, or entities as terrorists to a United Nations Security Council resolution committee. Clause 7, Mr. Speaker, amends Part 6 of the Act. The Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, must employ necessary procedures and mechanisms to collect or solicit as much information as possible to identify persons who would meet the relevant criteria for designation to the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions committees. Clause 7 also sets out the power and responsibility of the Attorney General in relation to the designation of people as terrorists. That's very important. These amendments, Mr. Speaker, are linked to the criterion of the recommendation 6 of the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendation, which deal with the application of targeted financial sanctions on persons and entities designated as terrorists. Mr. Speaker, this amendment also extends the power of the minister under Section 11 of the Act by substituting a new subsection 1, which empowers the minister to designate a person, a group, or entity a terrorist by order if he has reasonable grounds to believe that they have knowingly engaged or participated or attempted to participate or facilitate a terrorist act, is owned or controlled directly or indirectly by a terrorist person or group, or is knowingly acting on behalf or on direction or in association with a terrorist person or group. Mr. Speaker, we believe that this amendment is needed not only to prevent the ability for persons, or people more importantly, or groups, businesses, and entities to finance terrorism, but to do so in a timely manner. This is why Clause 13 provides for the freezing of funds without delay by inserting eight new sections. That is to say, Mr. Speaker, from 13A to 13H, that provide for how matters pertaining to the application for review of a designation of freezing order must be dealt with. This section requires that copies of application for review must be served upon the Attorney General, who will be given an opportunity to make a representation to the court in respect of any proceedings for the review of a designation order or a freezing order. This clause, Mr. Speaker, further prohibits the making of funds or assets available for benefit of a designated entity or person. It also places a duty on financial institutions and scheduled businesses to notify the Attorney General, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and the Financial Services Unit of any action taken to prohibit the dealing in funds, assets, or other economic resources. A person, group, or entity who has been designated a terrorist or a terrorist group can be removed from the United Nations sanction list upon application of the Attorney General under Clause 13E. A sanctions committee to be appointed by the minister is established by Clause 13F. The sanction committee, Mr. Speaker, will consist of representatives from a wide cross-section, including the Financial Services Unit, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Police Force, Customs, Inland Revenue, the chambers of the Attorney General, and any other relevant government or statutory body under Section 13F, subsection 1. This sanctions committee is responsible for keeping up to date with the designation criteria and the United Nations resolution list, as well as identifying persons who satisfy the criteria for designation and coordinating and conducting needed investigation for designation under 13F, subsection 2. The Sanction Committee has also, Mr. Speaker, a duty to notify relevant competent authority of identification made by the individuals, group, undertakings, or entities on a United Nations sanction list. By Clause 13H, the minister may make regulations, reference the criteria for designation, procedures, and standard forms for listing and providing statements of case mechanisms for communicating designation to the financial sector, the treatment of funds or assets held by designated entities, and the sanctions committee, etc., etc. Mr. Speaker, Clause 14 to 22 are consequential amendments to providing for insertion of words and terms flowing from amendments, some other provision of the Act, and do not require an in-depth traversing, Mr. Speaker. Most of it deals with expanding the scope of various sections of the Principal Act by making applicable to the schedule businesses. Clause 23 amends Section 2, Schedule 2 of the Act by inserting virtual assets business in the list of scheduled businesses. Mr. Speaker, overall, we are very confident of this legislation, which seeks to expand the abilities of the various enforcement agencies and entities to suppress the financing of terrorism. I commend this bill before this honorable House for debate.
The bill is before the House for debate.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the debate, we have debated on our energies in the earlier part of the morning. Have been exerted. I'm really talking about things we should also say yes and raise our hands in support and go to our respective offices and guidance those of us who have work to do, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill before this honorable House, and by so saying, I close this debate on this matter, Mr. Speaker.
This concludes the debate. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Suppression of Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time. Yes.
Suppression of Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House resumes, and I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Suppression of Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022 passed the committee stage without amendment. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
That the bill shortly entitled Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022 be read a third time and pass.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Suppression of Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Act 2022.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly. Yeah, members, before we proceed, yes, I did root the members of the Honorable House because it was an emergency session and the weekend was falling just in concurrent with that situation. So I made an exception to write to members and to allow the House to be open on Saturday and Sunday if members wished to do research. That was just an unprecedented circumstance, so that is why I did that exception. In the future, the House is always open from Monday to Friday, where members, Mondays to Fridays from 8 to 5, and Tuesday to Friday from 8 to 4, so members could come to the House to do their research anytime. So we can proceed.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I move that this Honorable House be adjourned, sine die.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It shall be moved and seconded that the House be adjourned, sine die. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House is adjourned, sine die.
Mr. Speaker.